we went to a party on the south side of Seattle. And I remember a point in the drive, and then I woke up in a hospital bed. There was a drunk driver going down the wrong way of I-5. The only reason I actually survived was because they were already chasing him. I was told by the college that I could resume my scholarship if I did 1/4 of community college to prove that I had mental faculties to recontinue. I dropped out within a week. I was coming back physically, but the most frustrating part was I had no timeline on how I would mentally recover. And there was no guarantee that I ever would. I just needed to leave. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna join. So about 6 months after the car accident, I went to the recruiter and, John Wayne Green Berets, I was like, and I heard there was this 18 X-ray program. I can go straight to Green Berets, sign me up. So I went through that process, only to find out that my splenectomy disqualified me. Luckily, the recruiter told me that there was a back route. Iran is a problem. The Islamic Republic has one goal, and that is death to Israel and death to America. I think it's naive of us to not believe them that this is their intention. So how do you go about this? And this is really the question. I believe that
Since the Civil War, dogs have stood alongside our military, proving to be indispensable partners. Our military prioritized ensuring proper canine nutrition for optimal performance, recognizing its vital role in mission success. Team Dog embodies that standard, offering science-based, customizable meal plans tailored to your dog's unique needs. Developed by a former Navy SEAL and canine trainer, Team Dog Food ensures the highest quality nutrition for our canine companions. Improve your dog's well-being. Be your dog's hero with Team Dog.
Ladies and gentlemen, as always, it's both an honor and a pleasure to welcome my next guest to the podcast. He's a former Tier 1 operator, Task Force Orange Intelligence Support Activity, or ISA. Also a Black Hawk pilot. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, the Stoic Viking, Joe England.
Appreciate it, Mike.
Thanks for coming. I like to ask everybody what the last full book that you read is.
So the last full book that I read is actually The Prince by what is it? By Machiavelli.
Yeah.
And so I combined this with two. I actually want to bring up two works. So I read the works of Friedrich Nietzsche.
Yeah.
And then right afterwards, I read the book by Machiavelli because, all the time I hear these terms like, oh, it's so Machiavellian, or it's that's so nihilistic. And when I hear these terms and I don't really understand them, and then when I hear that they're based on somebody who wrote, an important piece of literature, I have to read that book. Yeah. So the one that I honestly found really fascinating was Nietzsche's book, or his works, and especially his concept about how God is dead. I found that one particularly fascinating, especially when it comes to kind of like the way that society is moving, how we look at religion now these days. And then Machiavelli is obviously really, especially if you follow what goes on in politics, that's, now that I understand what Machiavellian means, it's...
Do you find that, I guess from an analogous standpoint, that most of the things that before you didn't know what it meant, now it lines up and makes sense?
It does, yeah.
Well, I guess is there a way to synopsize what that means as you relate to it?
With those specific works?
Yeah.
Well, the one for God is dead from Nietzsche, right? So I always heard the term that he's a nihilist. And nihilism is basically this concept that at the end of the day, nothing matters, right? Which was going back to, he had this concept, or we started to look at, as we started to understand science, we no longer needed religion to explain what was going on in the world. So the importance of religion started to fade. And that's what he was pointing out. He wasn't saying that God was dead. He was pointing out that we didn't need, sort of religion as much. And what he was worried about, and it's almost kind of a cautionary tale, it wasn't exactly seen like that when he wrote it, but now when you look back on it, is that he was actually warning that if we continue on this route of completely getting rid of faith in God, that we would eventually fall into nihilism, which is the concept that nothing matters.
Yeah. Do you agree with that?
I do, actually, in a way. And I've had my own spiritual journey. I grew up in a very devout Roman Catholic family. And I think that I have, in a number of different subjects, have went from the extreme to one end to the extreme to another, to the point where, in this particular subject, I probably entered atheism at one point. But then once you realize that, especially if you come from a background and you hold critical thinking to a high level, you cannot be an atheist if you value critical thinking, because it's, when you really look into it, that doesn't really make any sense. Yeah. So I eventually find myself almost always, no matter what subject it is, somewhere back where in the middle, which is I have room for faith. I think that there's definitely a possibility for it. So I consider myself probably agnostic, but I've definitely come back towards the possibility of like the existence of God and having my own sort of faith. But I deal with it in my own ways to, or what I hold to be true on a daily basis really corresponds with how I find myself most effective.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned and I appreciate you bringing that up or sharing that. You mentioned the examples in the government. Is there an example that sticks out in your mind from a Machiavellian standpoint that has happened recently where you made that connection?
Well, it's kind of one of the things about Machiavellian. It's really like the cunning works of how people are using the government to, get sort of, advance their careers, advance their agendas. And it's kind of, it's just constantly happening. There's very few, I think, politicians who are not participating in that sort of concept. So I think it's even harder it's actually harder to find somebody who isn't doing it.
Yeah. I tell you, from everything I've seen on, and I don't disagree, but Nick Freitas, who's in your area, I think, a former Green Beret guy.
You know what? Now that you point that out, I actually would completely agree. Nick Freitas is probably one. He is unapologetic. He is completely unapologetic about his statements. I love his shorts, especially. He always does the coffee cup, and always has a funny saying. So I would definitely say that Nick Freitas is definitely, but that's also probably one of the reasons why Nick Freitas struggles, because he is one of the few people who has probably built his entire campaign on character and integrity. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think that struggles within the political sphere.
Yeah, I agree. And this, not that I've consumed everything that he's put out, but I've watched a number of, either interviews or longer form statements that he's made. And I can't think of another politician that you can watch the critical thinking wheels turn while he's explaining things. And I also think he does a masterful job at explaining things, and a lot of it is on the fly. It's completely off the cuff. Absolutely. And I'm really impressed with him. I hope he goes much further than where he's at. But I
think that we've had a couple former soft guys, come into the political realm, and I think every single time we were excited. Yeah. And then they get in, but I feel like Nick Freitas is like the first one who puts his money where his mouth is. What we always hoped what a soft guy would do in politics. So I hope he continues on, and I hope he, because I think he should set the example for not just for what any state or federal level of Congress or senators should be, but I think he sets the example for what we should be as just former soft guys.
Agreed. I think he, I would say, routinely has an ability of explaining things in a way where it's intelligent, it's eloquent, it's well thought out, but it's balanced, and it's not arrogant or dismissive. And I think that if I had to pinpoint the one huge problem I have with almost all politicians, it's that I'm never wrong. You're an idiot for asking. Yeah. Even the way you're asking makes you even dumber than just that, and it's there's just this air of pompousness that is so incredibly insulting and frustrating, and he has none of that. He just does such a good job at explaining things where, he can be empathetic and respectful to somebody he may vehemently disagree with, but does so in a way where, one, he highlights that, but also can prove them wrong without being a dick about it.
Oh,
you know?
absolutely.
Anyway, not to sit here and blow Nick
No.
for the whole episode.
I would have to make, so one thing that I think is unique about him is he's funny.
Yeah.
And there's this concept, and I see like memes over this all the time, which is like how to basically prove somebody wrong or to make them feel stupid without them not knowing.
Yeah.
And I feel like Nick, in like his little quips,
Yeah.
he's really good at that.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah,
I'll
for
leave it
sure.
at that.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite quote?
So when I was younger, and I remember seeing the movie Braveheart.
Hold. That's your favorite quote?
One of them, right?
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, it's every man dies, not every man lives. And I always loved that quote. When I really got into Stoicism, come to find out that one of Marcus Aurelius's famous quotes is almost the exact same thing,
Yeah.
which is you should not fear dying. You should fear never actually truly living.
Yeah.
And to me, that I try to take that into to live life with purpose and to live it without fear, because at the end of the day, we're all going to be nothing but dust with 6 feet under. You know, we're all going to die one day, so
Yeah.
might as well make the best of it while we can.
Yeah, I agree. Similarly, I think, you know, the explosion of Stoicism here in the United States over the last decade or so, I don't think it's a coincidence in that, you know, the polarity shift of societal culture and morality, et cetera, and kind of a lack of purpose, I think, in many ways.
Yeah.
I don't think it's an accident that you see an explosion of that. Is there an element of it that you find the most relatable?
I think that the most important part, which I feel like is the greatest tenet of it, is you can't control the world outside of you, but you can control not only your actions, but most importantly, you can control how you interpret it.
Yeah.
Because everything is framing, right? You could have the worst thing that happens to you, but if you frame it in a possible, you actually turn it into something that's horrible, but it could be the greatest thing that ever happened to you farther down the road. And I think in a world of chaos, which, you know, you can only control so little of it, it's one of the things that I feel has not only in a lot of ways saved my own life, but has led me to really just find a better purpose in life and really help other people.
I couldn't agree more. I am definitely a fan or a subscriber of that methodology or ideology, if you want to call it that. I think the neat thing about kind of the summarization of what you just said is that I think in pretty much anybody's case, you can look back on your life and find examples of exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
You know, if you think about things that happened that you were devastated, but when you think about years or months or whatever afterwards, you know, how it actually ended up being even better than the thing that you were comfortable in before that bad thing happened, you know, I would hope, should provide some solace for people in realizing how accurate that is. Is there a resource or a book that you've found is kind of the pinnacle of Stoicism from a reference standpoint?
There's a number of different books. So Meditations is because Marcus Aurelius never intended to write a book. He just wrote his thoughts down and people compiled it. And a lot of literature that was written back then, it doesn't translate all that great, especially if, you know, I'm not the smartest person in the world. So sometimes like stuff that isn't sort of translated to concepts that we can better understand, a little bit harder to understand, you know, especially for me, it takes me a long time to go through it. So there's a couple like pure translations that I feel are kind of hard to read. But there are a couple different versions of his book or his compiled book, Meditations. But there's a guy who wrote, I think it's called Practical Stoicism. And it's definitely a easier way to consume it, which is interesting because the guy author of that book doesn't actually consider himself a Stoic, just more of a student of it. And I think that actually helps for him to kind of give an unbiased look.
Yeah.
How to understand it. And I actually just recently listened to him give it was like a Zoom call history of it through the Smithsonian Institute just this past week.
Oh, wow.
As a matter of fact.
Do you have or have you read the Daily Stoic, Ryan Holiday?
I have.
Yeah.
He was actually probably one of my inspirations for how I started my channel, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. To me, I love that book because it's such a short, clip or quote of it with a summarized paragraph in plain English that, or modern day English, I guess, that explains that and kind of relates it to day. And the fact that you can just ingest that for a few minutes, every morning, I think is a really good way to break into it or understand it. I find the same thing with a book called Jesus Calling by Sarah Young, who passed away a couple of years ago. But similarly, there's a ton of devotional, 365-day devotional things, but that one in particular, I think, does a really good job of, it's essentially the daily Stoic version of, messages from quotes from the Bible or kind of messages that I think really summarize, Jesus's angle on a lot of things, which is neat. What was your favorite thing to do growing up?
So we were, I was one of 5 children, and we were definitely your stereotypical jock family. So we played like every sport possible.
You were born in Germany, right?
Yeah. Well, I was born in Arizona, and then we moved to Germany 6 months after I was born. My father loved Germany, and he just kept finagling more and more assignments just to stay in Germany. So I moved to the continental United States for the first time when I was 13 years old.
Wow.
But when we were there, we actually played in the German soccer system because a lot of Americans who lived on base would play with the American soccer teams. My father chose to live on the economy. And Germany is really kind of a collection of small towns. So unlike here where you'd play for like a soccer club, you play for your town. And a town that's maybe 3 miles wide, you can drive through in a couple minutes, will have its own soccer complex and stadium. And you play for that town. So when we moved to the United States, me and my siblings were probably like a year or 2 ahead. And every single one of us except my younger brother, so 4 out of 5, all went to college for soccer.
Wow. Damn. So you I assume attended. Was it a public German school or was it like a private American?
No, we still went to the American schools. They have the Dodds school system over there, but we lived on the economy, and so
What does that mean? What is the economy?
Oh, so in the German, like outside of the bases, like we lived in German towns. We were like probably the only Americans who lived in that town.
Okay.
Our soccer coaches didn't speak English,
So do you speak fluent German?
No, we could speak conversational German, but when I left and I was 13, nobody really spoke it after that. So I can occasionally, if I'm in Germany for a little bit, maybe try to get in and out of a conversation, maybe at a restaurant without somebody not knowing I'm German.
Yeah.
So that's about as far as it goes, as far as my German goes.
Yeah. I'm really curious. I mean, even though you grew up or you attended American schools, but because they were in Germany, what was the both emphasis and kind of perspective of the Nazi Party in World War II? Like how was that taught there?
It's actually a really interesting question. So we were there during 2 different times. So we were there prior to the wall going down, because my father was an artillery officer there as a part of the defense of the Fulda Gap. And then we actually went to Alaska for 2 years. And then when we came back, the wall had fallen. And so he actually switched to becoming a military intelligence officer at that point.
Oh, wow.
So at this point, I was old enough to actually understand, and not only, but I spent time with the kids from my soccer team who were Germans, right? And luckily, they learned English at a very early age. And we always used to joke that they would bring me their English books to help. They were learning more advanced English than I was in school. So, but we would get on the subject of, they definitely live in shame of it, which is, I think, is kind of it's a shame itself, because the German people are sort of an amazing, hardworking people, and if they could, they would have national pride, but they're so afraid of it because they're afraid that what will happen again. And, I think that even goes to kind of kudos to them, because they know like how skilled and how great of a people they truly are, that if they somehow were to get powerful again, that they can cause damage. You know, if you look at the grand scheme, think how small of a country that is, and how it almost took over the world twice.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, I mean, from my understanding of it, I mean, World War I seems like it was pretty catastrophic for them, and the aftermath of that, and the decline of the economy, and all of the sanctions, and the Treaty of Versailles, and, you know, everything that kind of stifled them to a point that allowed somebody like Hitler to rise in power to enact World War II is kind of a separate, if you want to call it, issue. To me, what's scary is that, you know, in looking at kind of the progress of World War II, like if he had stopped halfway through Czechoslovakia, you know, the Eastern Bloc, Poland, Czech, that like there was a point at which, you know, Germany and Russia basically had split it up, and we're kind of like, okay, here is good, like let's hit the pause button, you know, and also had taken over all of France, and they basically just gave it to him. You're just kind of like, well, whatever. If he had stopped there, you know, and spent the next, you know, several years just building further and not pushing the envelope further, and I think wasn't so arrogant and impulsive in trying to attack Russia, like they probably would have won and taken over the entire planet.
I agree.
I think his impatience is the only reason that we collectively as an allied collective were able to stop it, which is frightening because, agreed, like it's not a very big country, and their ability to do what they did in such a short amount of time is staggering, you know, in a very, very frightening way. But
I actually completely agree. I would say his two biggest blunders were attacking Russia, because Russia was completely fine with what Germany was doing.
Yeah.
Probably could have taken England as well.
For sure.
And the biggest blunder, which actually was not technically their fault, which was Japan attacking us.
Yeah.
If they had not done either of those, Japan and Germany probably would have controlled for probably quite some time a good portion of the world.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess with that, growing up in Germany, is what were the lessons learned and kind of that shame that you speak of? Is that something that's almost browbeaten and like a constant feeling and vibe within the culture there also?
It is, yeah. To the point where they don't even, it's almost like the whole Voldemort thing, you know, the person, we do not say his name. You know, you can go to, I don't know if you can go to jail, but you get heavily fined for even doing the Sieg Heil salute. Wow. You know, even putting your hand up in like that formation. Like they're just so, you know, so against it, don't even want to bring it. And then when even if it's completely innocent, if you start to have some sort of German national pride, people are like, whoa, like,
hold on,
slow down, like let's be careful here, right?
Yeah.
Which is a shame because, you know, the German people, like culturally, are like a very hardworking, studious people, and you know, very nice, very pleasant. I've always really enjoyed the food, so it's kind of a shame, you know.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So with that, I guess now moving back or fast forwarding to, you moved back to the States at 13. Back to Arizona? Or?
No, we went to Washington State. My father took his last duty station where he'd eventually retire at Fort Lewis.
Okay. And your mom tragically passed away when you were 15?
She did, yeah.
I can only imagine the impact that had. I mean, how did your family handle that?
You know, I think each one of us handled it in different ways. I was sort of like the black sheep of the family because I wasn't the youngest, but I wasn't the oldest, wasn't the namesake, and I was always kind of like very independent and off on my own. I think it was really the first time that I dealt with death, which I actually think it set me up for success later in life, dealing with it at a younger age. My mother passed away, and then all my grandparents probably passed away before I was even, by the time I was 18 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then when my father eventually passed away, while later on was in the military, my sister is the oldest living member of our family.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, that kind of tumultuous experiences at that point in your life, I imagine it is a bit of a fork in the road where it can either kind of make you spiral or not incentivize, but kind of motivate you to to do things almost in spite of that type of, I guess, just struggle.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like that's kind of the path you took.
It was. And I think that, you quickly develop, at that early age, a very dark sense of humor, and how I, dealt with it. We'd start joking about like how my dad, he better be careful that, who he dates next, because my mother just might, when he finally gets up there, beat the crap out of him.
Yeah. During your, I guess, high school years, was the thought or motivation to serve within you at that point, or was it a catalyst in college that brought that on?
It actually started when I was 10 years old, and we were living in Germany, and we didn't really have TV, or we didn't have cable TV, but we did have my dad's VHS collection from like the 70s and the 80s, and so mostly the 80s. So we had all the 80s movies, pretty much every
Rambo, Commando.
Yeah, Rambo, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Stallone. But I remember specifically John Wayne in the Green Berets. And that movie stuck out to me. And then I kind of became obsessed with all things military. And I remember this, for my 10th birthday, my father got me a Jane's Military Dictionary. I've never been so excited. I read that thing cover to cover, memorized the whole thing. Yeah. And this was my goal, probably until I got to junior year of college. And I was a late bloomer. I was like 5 foot tall freshman year. I wrestled at 115 pounds.
In college?
No, in high school.
Oh, okay.
My freshman year of high school. I was 5 foot my freshman year, and I was 5'8" my sophomore year.
Wow.
And then by my junior year, I think I finally started to get noticed by girls. And I was on the soccer team, the varsity soccer team, my freshman year, and I was captain by my junior year.
Oh, wow.
And I was already, thanks to my older brother who is now playing at Seattle University soccer team, I was already getting recruited to go to Seattle University, and I'm getting noticed by girls. And so my motivation to join the military was slowly waning, because I started developing delusions of grandeur of becoming a professional soccer player. Yeah. And, especially with the attention that I was getting through my ability, that I was, how I was playing soccer at the time, and then eventually into college.
So you go to college, you're playing soccer, but you got into a gnarly accident, right?
Yeah. So one night, I just finished my first season, and my girlfriend, who was going to the University of Washington, which is on the north side of Seattle, we went to a party on the south side of Seattle. And I remember a point in the drive, and then I woke up in a hospital bed.
Wow.
And I had a respirator in. My arm was completely. I was in casts. My whole body was like pretty much in a cast, and I couldn't speak. And eventually, what I would learn, what had happened was there was a drunk driver going down the wrong way of I-5, which is a large divided highway. So this guy actually had to enter an entry ramp from the opposite side. So, and the only reason I actually survived was because they were already chasing him, because he had already almost hit a taxi cab. So he called it in. So the cops were chasing him. So when he hit me, they were there within a minute.
Oh, wow.
And they were able to, then they had to use the jaws of life to cut me out of the car.
Was your girlfriend okay?
She was. So luckily I had turned at the last second, went headlight to headlight, and then it T-boned, and so it ended up crushing the left side of my body.
Wow.
So I lost my spleen. I actually still, 21 years, I actually still have contusions on my left leg. I have a brain hemorrhage. There's a little X right here above my thing. And then 29 staples and 29 stitches all through it, like cut off my elbow halfway and all these different things. Yeah. So that, and these injuries would complicate things for me in the rest of my career.
Well, I imagine your soccer career at that point is over.
It was, and not as much as part of the physical, but it was actually because of the brain damage.
Oh, wow.
I regressed to what they believed was the equivalent of a second or first grade math level.
Man. Was that, or how long were you in that kind of mental state? I mean, was it something that...
Years.
Yeah. I mean, did you ever become completely or fully out of it, or does it...
It's hard to tell these days. I definitely struggle still to this day with speech. And it's something that and actually one of the things that I really appreciate about creating content is this public speaking has definitely helped me practice it. But I have definitely struggled with it, especially the first 5 years of my military career. If there was somebody who was a person of authority, a commander came to talk to me, I would completely lose all powers of speech. I just, anytime there was any level of intimidation, I would just completely go down, and my brain wouldn't work. The first initial problems, which was really scary, was I had really bad short-term memory. I'd have conversations with people, and 2 minutes later, my dad would be like, I told you to go do something. I was like, I don't even remember us talking.
Yeah.
So
from laying in the hospital bed to joining the military, what was that path like?
So that was about 6 months. So I was told by the college that I could resume my scholarship if I did 1 quarter of community college to prove that I had the mental faculties to recontinue. Accident happened December 4th of 2004. January 2nd of 2005, I went back to school. It was a bad idea. I dropped out within a week.
Wow. You've all heard me talk about Beam before, and there's a reason that I keep coming back to it. This is part of my actual nightly routine. If you somehow haven't tried it yet, that means you used to be just like me. Every night, the same story. Tossing and turning, staring at the ceiling, then dragging yourself through the next day on coffee. That was me. But Beam sent me their dream powder, and I started sleeping through the night without tossing and turning, waking up energized instead of groggy. And when your job requires you to be sharp and on, bad sleep isn't an option. Dream is made with a powerful blend of all natural ingredients: reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin. None of that drugstore stuff that leaves you foggy the next morning. The chocolate peanut butter flavor they sent me is genuinely delicious. It tastes like hot cocoa before bed. Made right here in America, no shortcuts, and no junk. And I'm not alone. Beam has improved over 28 million nights of sleep across this country. If you've been waiting for the right time to try Dream, this is it. Go to shopbeam.com/micdrop and use the code MicDrop and get my exclusive offer for up to 40% off Beam's Dream Powder. So with my discount code MicDrop, all caps, all one word, you can get their best-selling Dream Powder for just $39. Stop pretending like you're still in your 20s and that you can survive a whole day without a good night's sleep. Place your order for Beam and see the difference.
But I was having issues at home. My family was blaming my girlfriend. They're like, oh, if you'd not been with, they didn't like her anyways. If you'd not been with her, it was all her fault. It had nothing to do with the drunk driver, right? So I was frustrated. I was coming back physically, but the most frustrating part was I had no timeline on how I would mentally recover. And there was no guarantee that I ever would. So I was just like, everything was going wrong. I just needed to leave. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to join. So about 6 months after the car accident, I went to the recruiter and, John Wayne, Green Berets. I was like, and I heard there was this 18 X-ray program. I can go straight to Green Berets, sign me up. So I went through that process only to find out that my splenectomy disqualified me. Because apparently, I believe this medical doctor, this is the way it was explained to me. The medical doctrine is based back to like the Vietnam area, and your spleen is a part of your immune system, but it mainly fights fevers, and that was a worry, especially during the Vietnam conflict. So I could be pretty much anything else: be Ranger, Airborne, Tier 1, just Special Forces. The only thing disqualified me. And luckily, the recruiter told me that there was a back route, right? And the ironic thing is, as we know, most recruiters don't know anything, right? Yeah. The fact that this guy actually knew this one specific thing was kind of impressive. But he told me that I could go get my language, I could go be a linguist, and then I could get within a special forces group, and then they'd give me a waiver because no MEPS doctor was going to give me a waiver. So I did that. I got Persian Farsi. Despite my mental setbacks, I passed, didn't roll back. I passed in a year, almost maxed out the DLPT on that particular language, and then went to Airborne, and then got assigned to 5th Special Forces Group I had a slight hiccup with my airborne packet that, I was able to get around.
That's
But
impressive.
I was able to get to 5th Group and then went on my first deployment, got attached to an ODA, and I impressed the ODA that I was with that the 18 Zulu actually he started the process of getting my waiver started, which then he got the battalion CSM, the battalion commander involved, and as they were coming around to do their team house visits for that trip, he set up a personal interview, and I actually had a personal interview with the battalion commander and CSM, and based off that interview and the 18 Zulu boomer, they decided that the battalion CSM was going to take on my waiver personally. And he researched it, found out I needed a general officer. So when we got back, we put in the waiver, and the week that it went up, we had gotten word that it was signed by his deputy, but then it needed to be signed by that general. Somebody in the selection in SFAS died due to a supposed snake bite. There was whether it was dehydration, a number of different issues. But days after that, the commander had decided that he was not going to assume the risk of somebody who had technically had a compromised immune system. Wow. So I was turned down.
Man.
I submitted it again, thinking that with stronger recommendations it might help. It didn't. But luckily, in between those 2 deployments, which we were at one team house, came back for 6 months, and then we were going back to the exact same team house to replace 1st Group who had replaced us. I was fortunate enough to be a part of a pilot course run by former Delta Force and former TFO guys. And it was an 8-week course, and it was the pilot course that would later become SOCOM's advanced GSM SIGINT course. It was run by a company called Prometheus.
Which means what for the...
So SIGINT is a signals intelligence. And at that time, this was 2008, and we were heavily capitalizing on cellular devices to target individuals, especially in Iraq, also Afghanistan, but Iraq, that was how we were getting really all our targets. And it was how to the latest and greatest coming from the tier 1 units of how to not only analyze, but to exploit cellular devices within signals intelligence. And it was probably some of the best training I've ever had in my military career.
Do sat phones fall into that category, or are they harder to?
So yes and no. So technically it does, but it also technically falls within another category. But it does. We do incorporate satellite phones into SIGINT. There is an argument that it also exists in another int, but SIGINT takes it as well.
So they're no more secure than a cell phone in that regard.
It depends. So as technologies evolved, right? So with the beauty of this time, there was very little encryption, and there was almost no encryption when it came to satellite phones, because nobody was really, it's whether or not that particular company, and I think at the time, really there was only one satellite phone company, which I believe, if I remember correctly, is Iridium. And its customer base didn't really need encryption at the time. Just like there was 2 main cellular protocols at the time. There was GSM and there was CDMA. CDMA had encryption, but wasn't turned on for probably 6 or 7 years. So it wasn't until like later on when this particular protocol wised up that they were being exploited, did they actually turn on their levels of encryption. But it's changed over time. And that was probably the hardest part about SIGINT, is technology changes at such a fast rate that every deployment, the way that our TTPs, within a year, those TTPs no longer worked. Wow. And we had to develop new ones. Yeah. And this actually ended up becoming probably the hardest part about being an ISA, was to stay up on your skills. The SIGINT was always the hardest to stay on the latest and greatest.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I mean, I think even now, Iridium and Inmarsat are really the only 2 companies that largely produce sat phones, and I don't think either one of them, for civilian use at least, are secure. I think you have to be, government. You have to have certain waivers or whatever. But
I believe so. Yeah.
In those first two deployments, being attached to SF units, was it primarily linguist stuff, or what were you doing?
So it was primarily at this time. So my first deployment, I would actually say we were kind of more on a force protection because that's how SADE started. So it's Special Operations Team Alpha, and your job is to be with SF teams, and as they go around doing their operations, you're there with like HF interception or whatever communication interceptions, and you're trying to listen to say like, hey, can you hear if someone's talking about how they're about to ambush your column or something like that? And so that's one of the reasons why SADEs at this time were only linguists. But as cellular technology would become sort of our focus within SIGINT, that changed us from being more of a force protection to be more of an offensive intelligence operations, and especially with how RF energy works with cellular, it's very short range. So we would learn terminal guidance. So we would actually become the guys in certain situations, either being the ones on foot or in the vehicles who actually geolocate the targets, or using it in conjunction with aircraft, which was usually the best way to do it. Use parasitic devices, and we could walk in on the targets and actually verify the actual phone with the parasitic device while I have an aircraft overhead who's got the phone locked up.
Wow. That's some whiz-bang shit, no doubt about it.
So the second deployment, after I had this training with the green and orange, I went into the second deployment with a whole wealth of knowledge, and I actually ended up becoming the singular attachment. I was actually Boomer, the ODA from actually requested me alone to be his attachment, and said that if the entire SADE team was going to be sent, he was going to reject it. He's like, only. So I sat next to the 18 Fox and the 18 Zulu, and I used all my brand new skills that I learned from that training, and I definitely was added value to that team with my new knowledge.
Are there any operational stories you can share?
I don't think really. I will tell. So one of the funny things that I think about what happens in that. So as we're moving around and we're going around the ODAs, when we're not doing terminal guidance and we're not bringing analysis, and a lot of what we do is we would use SIGINT to verify HUMINT and vice versa. And now I think like that was the biggest thing that we brought to the ODAs, is because they're very HUMINT centric. They've got their 18 Fox, and they got the couple guys on the team who are their ASOT level trained guys who can handle sources. But HUMINT only goes so far. With SIGINT, we could verify like their stories, were they actually at the locations that they claim to be. But when we weren't doing that, and we weren't doing hits based off of SIGINT, we're still doing force protection. We go to like key leader engagements, and we'd be sitting there, and as our 18 Alpha is meeting with the IP chief or whatever garrison commander of the Iraqi army, we're sitting and we're listening to the recent the chatter going on in town, and this is probably noon, about lunchtime, and we're watching text messages come across, and I can tell you about 95% of all communications in Iraq around lunchtime is sexting.
Like normal stuff or
totally? There's some kinky stuff going on, and it definitely helped because us in the ODA, we're at a security halt, and we're pulling security, and it definitely helped to let time go by. I'd get on the radio and be like, oh, you want to know what Muhammad just said to his mistress?
What's the craziest thing you heard?
Well, in Islam, there's especially in a lot of cultures, especially in Iraq, you're supposed to be a virgin when you get married, but the youth still wants to date. So let's just say that they find a loophole in the proverbial back door.
Yeah. That's a trip, man. What is it about lunchtime that's the window that...
I think just Iraqis just in general, they don't really have much else better to do. I will say, of all the cultures that I've ever been deployed to with and been about, I find Iraqis to probably be the most lackadaisical culture I think I've ever been around.
Yeah, that's interesting. Dude, what a trip. All right, so you do those two deployments. You get that extra training. You put the waiver in. It gets almost approved, but then denied. So now what?
So luckily, at the end of that 8-week course, in between the deployments, the course director was a former squadron command sergeant major of Orange. And on the last day when they're giving out our certificates, he pulls me aside. And he's like, hey, I've heard about your waivers and how you're getting turned down, and we really really thought highly of your performance in this course. And to be honest, we think you have what it takes to be on the operational side. And I think you should skip JV and why don't you come straight to varsity? And he hands me the recruiter information. So I take it, and during my second deployment, during my off time, I proceed to fill out this 40-plus application, and I submit it, and we get back, I think, October of 2009, and I go to operator selection in March, April of 2010.
For the viewer / listener, and can you kind of synopsize what Orange is? I know that there's some sensitivity there, but it's one of those things that, in the YouTube or veteran podcast space over the last decade or so, it's probably the one thing that still hasn't been talked about much, that a lot of people aren't even familiar that it exists.
They were definitely, and they still are, the most secretive of, because technically there's 5 tier 1 units. I always thought it was just the 3. I always just thought it was blue, green, and orange, but it makes sense. 24th SCS and then RRC.
Can you say those two again?
RRC.
Yeah.
So it's a Ranger Reconnaissance Company, or Ranger, I think it's also known as RRD. So it's basically the tier 1 of Rangers. And JSOC considers them, because tier 1 really comes down to its funding. So when JSOC considers you a tier 1 unit, you get more funding, right? So that's what's important. And there's 5 of them. And so you have 24th STS, which is your JTACs, your CCTs, and then I think you even have pararescue. And it's because they support tier 1 and tier 2 units. And then you have RRC, which is your tier 1 Rangers. But it's definitely the smallest of all the organizations. The 3 main ones, which I've always considered are the 3 largest, which is blue, green, and orange. So orange is an amalgamation of it started out as the Army's CIA, because when the Iran hostage crisis failed, at that time there was no JSOC, there was no SOCOM. You just had Delta Force, you had Rangers, you had Green Berets, and you had SEALs, and even SEAL Team 6 at this point didn't exist yet. That failure of that operation pointed out so many holes that we had within our military. One, we needed a special operations command. We needed special operations pilots, which is where 160th came from. There were CIA sources on the ground, which the CIA was not playing nice with the military, refusing to give information and access to sources, especially because they were planning a second hostage attempt. So the Army, in its infinite wisdom, which they have done time again, when they don't have a capability, they grow it organically. So they decided to create their own version of the CIA within the Army. And that, its first official name would become the Intelligence Support Activity, or ISA. And then at some point in the 80s, they started changing their name like every 6 months, every year. And to the point where I was not even 100% sure of what unit I was going to selection for. But they are eventually an amalgamation of the CIA, the NSA, and the DIA, which even the CIA has its own Science and Directorate Division, which is its own version of the NSA. So, they were supposed to be the intelligence organization that supported blue and green. And they also do their own strategic level operations, kind of like how the CIA does, in addition to their support of blue and green.
And the operations that you're speaking of would be hands-on field work.
Yes.
How in-depth can you get into what that entails?
If you can imagine what typically outside on the tactical side, because there is a tactical side of supporting blue and green, most of the operations are done clandestinely, and like very much in the way that CIA does things. So most operations are either an alias or at least some level of official cover. But I would say majority of my operations that I did outside of the tactical detachment, where I supported blue and green, were all an alias.
Yeah.
Minus one.
And so you applied and you get picked up and you go to selection.
Yeah.
Can you say about how many people started versus finished and how long it is?
So selection, so a lot of ways, the unit was cloned from Delta Force. So Colonel Jerry King, who created the unit, was a fan of what Colonel Beckwith had did over at Delta Force. So he cloned almost everything, including selection. So they used it as like their, with the exception of it's in a completely different place in the country. You know, it's a completely different geographical landscape. A lot of it mirrors a lot of what goes on in CAG selection. I would say theirs is slightly more physical. Ours is slightly more mentally challenging. And if you ever heard the colloquial terms long walk versus the short walk, theirs is the long walk, ours is the short walk, because our final land nav movement is slightly shorter than theirs. Theirs is 40 miles, ours is slightly shorter.
Can you say how much shorter?
No.
Yeah.
But it is.
Can you say
it's a bit of a it's a bit of a walk. It's more than half.
Okay.
It's more than half. Yeah. It's a bit of a walk.
Yeah. So it's slightly shorter.
Yeah, and it's about 5 weeks, and but you don't know when it's going to end, and it's completely minus a few days. Almost the entire selection is individual. You're by yourself. You don't really have any interaction with anybody during the entire time. You don't have any positive or negative feedback from the instructors. You're given instructions once, and you do not know if you have failed an event or do you know your times unless you are pulled onto a truck, and you're all given pseudonyms. If you just randomly, your pseudonym is called and everybody else is getting on different trucks for that morning muster and you happen to be by yourself, we would never see that person ever again.
Yeah. Do you remember how many guys started versus finished?
My particular class, I want to say that we started with like 60, and I think maybe 20 made it past that I saw ever again.
Yeah.
So,
man, that's fascinating. I didn't realize that it mirrored the Delta selection so closely. Once you make it through that, then what?
Then we go to OTC. And then you get orders to go to where you would think maybe the real the Army of Northern Virginia might be in a location, but it's located in all over. It's probably located across like 4 or 5 different states. It's very spread out. But OTC is located in a location which actually you at that point in OTC you actually have no idea where the unit is located. You're actually in an offsite, and you're actually not allowed to even know where the unit is actually located until you graduate.
Oh wow.
OTC. Because at every point, including the pseudonyms during selection, OTC, if you ever don't make it, they never want you to know where the actual operational portions of the unit are actually located.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But OTC ends up being almost a year long.
Like for you, or it's just normal?
No, it's about, I think it's close to 11 months.
And does it mirror Deltas?
That is definitely, it's definitely where we differ. So Deltas is very specific. They concentrate on CQBs. I think theirs is about 6 months long. We have to go into, so we are an intelligence discipline, and not just a singular intelligence discipline. We try to incorporate every intelligence discipline and try to be a full spectrum operative. But because of the status that we deploy in, we need tradecraft, and we need a lot of it. So I would actually say the first half is just tradecraft. And even the SIGINT guys are trained up to an ASOT level 3 just in OTC.
Can you give any type of like broad spectrum description as to what tradecraft entails in that discipline?
So tradecraft is how you conduct clandestine operations. So if anybody's seen your typical CIA movies talking about dead drops or surveillance and surveillance detection routes, can I determine whether or not I'm being followed? Or can I follow somebody without someone figure out that I'm following him? Or can I conduct operations in the middle of the day without somebody? Can I have a conversation with somebody? Can I plant information for somebody else to grab? All the different techniques. And then obviously we use low-tech techniques, and we also use high-tech techniques. How do you disguise information that may be on your cell phone or your computer, and how do you extract information from sources And so these are the type of things of how you operate, because if you are on a mission, the first thing that you have to do is protect your cover. Because if you have lost your cover, you have now, not only have you become completely ineffective, you are now a danger to the mission. And especially if it's a reoccurring, or the mission is like, it's a long-standing mission, you may have compromised years of work.
Wow.
So it's not sexy, but the tradecraft is such an essential skill, and you don't really understand this. But I'll give you an example of how important this is. Surveillance detection. If you were to go to a country and you were a military-age male, and you foreign service intelligence is going to probably track you for a little bit. If someone is doing surveillance on you, they'll probably assign 4 or 5 cars to you. When 4 or 5 cars are on you, with enough surveillance detection training, you can tell whether or not you are being followed. And the second that they realize that you have training, and this is the other part, you have to do all this without ever letting them know that you know what they're doing. If I was to detect that they have training, I am now going to put 30 people on this. And you cannot detect surveillance of a 30-car surveillance team, because just one of you will follow a block and they just exchange out. And it's impossible. And at that point, which is even more dangerous, you have no idea if you're being followed. So, and you go to a target and then you go to a source, you've completely compromised that mission. So there's a balance of how do you detect surveillance without them knowing that you're detecting surveillance, and you have to lull them into sleep. So a lot of times, which is typical when you first get in the country, you'll probably spend 2 weeks operationally doing nothing, because you have to lull whoever is, whatever country you're in, whatever security service, you have to lull them into sleep. You're like, oh, okay, they're nothing. And they don't dedicate any resources to you. But the second that they do, the best case scenario is you realize you've been compromised. Worst case scenario, you have no idea that you've been compromised.
Are there any examples that you can give of the doing nothing, other than literally doing nothing? I mean, are you doing specific, like going to meet women or go to nice restaurants, or like what?
You have to understand what the culture is in that country. You'd have to understand who you are in that country, or who you're supposed to be, and what that person would be doing. So you have to emulate those things, and you have to act as normal. You have to do normal things.
Could you give us any type of hypothetical?
Let's just say that, if you are an American who was in Lebanon, right? Lebanon has a really nice night scene. You're going to go out there, go to meet Lebanese women, go on dates, meet women at coffee shops and things like that. And then obviously you're there for a job, right? Or whatever they believe your job to be.
So like, would a typical alias in that scenario be like a construction worker or a consultant, or,
something like a consultant, maybe a businessman, something like it. All depends on what would work in that particular area. What would, especially for someone who looks like me. That was definitely one of the struggles, being 6'2", 230 pounds, do not fit in as well as my other compatriots, who had dark hair, had more maybe sort of a Mediterranean look going for them. So all this did make things harder for me, but it definitely, you would have to go about your life and what a normal red-blooded male at that age who has that type of job would do, or whoever you said you were would go about doing things.
Are there guidelines or like maybe guardrails in terms of, especially like if you're a young fit guy going out to a night scene, like it's likely that you hook up with some chick? Is there you can only go that you should only go this far, or is it like, well, what you do is your business? Because the honeypot thing is a huge tactic internationally, because guys are guys, and I mean there's millions of examples of hot young women who approach these guys for nefarious reasons, and it's a plant on them. Like, is that something that is part of the training, talking about that?
It to be honest, it is not discussed as much as it should be.
Yeah,
but luckily, in that type of job, in the training, it's not really discussed as probably as much as it should be. But most seniors that take you under their wing are like, hey, if
it seems too good to be true.
Exactly. But that will say that there's one thing that we are told within that intelligence pipeline is that anytime you receive any intelligence, if it's something you like really want to hear, consider it too good to be true, especially on the human side of things. And especially when it comes to an attractive woman, right?
Yeah. Have you watched the show Homeland at all?
I have, yeah.
I mean, there's several examples in there of like that kind of thing where like these guys let their guard down because for all those reasons, and even, the main character uses that to her advantage on multiple occasions.
She does.
I imagine that's fairly accurate.
I would say that Homeland is probably one of the most accurate depictions of that life that I have seen.
Really?
Yeah.
Hey guys, most dress shirts make you choose between looking good or feeling comfortable. Mizzen Main finally fixes that. I've been wearing their shirts for a while now, and I got to tell you, they're stretchy, they're lightweight, they're moisture wicking, wrinkle resistant, and completely machine washable with no ironing needed whatsoever. You can wear them from the office to the range and still feel great. They're a veteran-led company that supports vets with a year-round military discount and gives back, and I can really respect that. Right now, listeners get 20% off your first purchase at mizzenandmain.com with promo code MikeDrop20. That's MIZZEN and Main.com, code MikeDrop20. And if you'd rather shop in person, you can find Mizzen and Main stores in select states. Check them out. You will feel the difference immediately. Like Shy, I mean, some of it is
Shy of the craziness stuff that goes on with the chick, Claire Danes, but of anything. So one thing that we do, because we are the Army's version of or CIA. Eventually, we would rebuild our relationship with the CIA, and we would actually become sort of a partner with them, because we found between their authorities and our authorities, we could get around the limitations of their authorities or our authorities. So we started doing operations with them quite a lot. So you start working with them in their spaces very often. So you really get to see what's, what we're supposed to be, so you get to see what their life is like. Homeland is probably the most accurate depiction. I would say The Recruit with, who was his name?
Robert Redford?
No. I'm thinking of, the one that's the Irish guy. Because I'm trying to. The Recruit is a different movie.
Okay.
The one with Robert Redford, there is some things in there. No, it's the one. He's an Irish actor. You would know him. I'm trying to think of his
Liam Neeson?
name. No, he's the guy who. I got to think about this. He's like dark black hair, spiky. It's a CIA recruitment movie with Al Pacino.
I know what you're talking about. I can't think of the guy's name, but that's a pretty accurate.
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate of like how the training works.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah, so those are probably, but how things work as far as the agency goes, Homeland is, this is a relative term, the most accurate depiction that I've seen. Most of them are way off.
Yeah.
But
is there an example that stands out that is like tangible to where you're like, yeah, that either happened or absolutely would happen, like from the show that comes to mind?
I think it's been a while since I've seen the actual show, but how they deal with sources, I think, is a decent depiction. And then how orders come down through the bureaucracy of the upper echelons of management, and how that can create friction.
Yeah. One thing I was curious about in watching it is that, HIPAA doesn't really exist when it comes to positions like that. Like her having a bipolar or borderline personality, whatever disorder she has, like that would not fly. Like having to be on that medication.
Yeah, that's where I definitely I never saw anything like that. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, in the intelligence world, I feel like especially in the intelligence world, there's some interesting, unique individuals, right? Yeah. One of the most successful guys I ever worked with, this man we got to country, and he was a solo operative. And we were there. I was the leader of a team, and we were in a conjoined team, but he was a solo. I was in charge of a 2-man team. And we got to Baghdad, and this was 2014, the ISIS invasion. We were like the first Americans back in. And there was still some chews, or the little huts that we used to live in at BIOP. And this individual refused to sleep inside. He would sleep outside, right? Believed that there was some chemical issue, showers, stuff like that. These are the type of people that you run into the intelligence world, who have some interesting individuals, but never to a level of instability. If your personality trait bred instability, it would not fly.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine like there's certain aspects of being on the spectrum that would actually be super beneficial. Like, because there's certainly plenty of cases where, like, there's a brilliance, a savant-like
exactly
pattern recognition and an ability way above what most people have to do certain things. Do you see personalities like that?
Absolutely. I see that like that individual I was just talking about. He was definitely a savant when it came to the human intelligence side of things. This man could relate to sources like you couldn't believe. He could not relate to the rest of us very well. And then on the SIGINT side of things, so in the NSA, they're called wall walkers, right? And typically the guys who create some of the most amazing stuff, or some of the most amazing analysts in the NSA, have zero ability to understand human emotion or interaction. Yeah. So as you're walking by them, and the NSA hallways are probably like 20 feet wide. These guys will start hugging the wall as you walk past them, so we call them wall walkers.
That's a trip. Apologies, my curiosity has us bouncing around a little bit. But so going back to OTC, the first half is Tradecraft.
Yeah.
The second half is?
So the second half is you start learning the human and SIGINT skills that you're going to be using, and then you take that and then you put them in real world exercises, which to be honest, that was the most impressive part of the course, was that they were able to conduct multiple large scale operations for you to do in alias.
Wow.
Inside the United States. And obviously the security forces within, obviously there's a few people, like maybe one or two people within that particular FBI office or that police department in that city who would know that there's an exercise going on, but everybody else doesn't. Wow. And you're actually conducting in alias inside the United States. And the way that they put it on was some of the best practical training I think you could ever do without actually going on an actual operation. So that impressed me.
From an alias standpoint, are they, even for training, I imagine for real world it's obviously this way, but for even in training, are they doing like real passports and driver's licenses and bank statements, and things to prove your alias should an actual civilian law enforcement agency look into you?
They are.
Why do I feel like you're getting ready to skirt this?
Yeah.
Skirt the answer. That it's a yes, but
yes. They are. There's a reason why they are the best documents that there are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just leave it at that.
That's, fascinating stuff for sure. And of course, the real world stuff, there's pulling out all the stops, like they're going to do whatever they have to. What kind of gatekeeping is there for you guys in terms of, document custody and disposal, and, to me, it would be whether it's Jason Bourne, the Homeland, pretty much any movie or show that has anything to do with intelligence activities, there's always the safe deposit box with the duffel bag with 9 fucking passports and a stack of cash and gold coins and whatever. How BS is that versus what the real thing is?
That's a lot of BS. Yeah. So I would say that some of the biggest separations that I think that people think from Hollywood, right, which is one, the depth of our covers. They're not deep. Nobody comes to me and says, "Hey, this is who you are." Right?
Memorize
I
this.
might be given a name. That's it.
Wow.
I have to come up with the rest of it all on my own.
To me, that actually makes more sense than having somebody memorize something they didn't come up with.
Yeah.
You know.
And it works out for the government because it's one thing less thing that they have to do, one less thing that they have to fuck up, and it is better for us to kind of come up with it on our own, because the best way to do that, especially if you're on a long mission, 3-6 months, maybe longer, you need to believe this lie.
Yeah.
Because everything depends on it, not just your life, but other people's lives involved. Because if you slip up and then suddenly you've given away that you might be this person, and then you have so many security or intelligence services on you that you could compromise the next mission and people get killed.
Is there training, or do they give you training to develop your cover, or is it just completely your imagination?
They give you ideas. They do give you training on how to do it, but at the end of the day, it has to come up to something that you can believe, that you can remember, that it is. They do teach you how to be as plausible. They show you where the pitfalls are and what things you want to stay from. So I would think about one of the best lessons that I ever learned. Any sort of information you ever give, if you give it, any lie that you may give, right, which is most of everything you're saying anyways, at some point you may have to make it true to protect your cover. So how plausible, so when you talk about things, right, the more outlandish of a lie that you come up with means how outlandish of like something you might have to pull together to make true. So you want to be very, very careful. And then it's very important, the concept of peeling back the onion, right? If someone starts asking you questions, you give as little information as possible, right? And then if someone starts asking more, then you give a little bit more, right? But you never give too much, because the more that you give, the more you're going to have to make up for later.
So in other words, don't tell them you're a porn star if you're not.
Yeah, exactly.
'Cause you're going to have to prove it. Yeah. Prove it.
Yep.
Man, it's such a fascinating world. All right, so second half of the operator training course, you finish that. You are one of the few that graduate. What's next?
So then we finally get to go to the actual unit and get to see where it's actually located. You get to go to headquarters. You get to go to the squadron that you're going to be assigned to, which are all in different locations. And then you go around and you visit all the agencies, because you work with all the intel agencies. You do briefs. We have liaisons at every single one of them. And this is where our unit changing its name like every 6 months to a year, complicates things. I feel like they're too secretive to almost their own detriment. But so usually you get assigned to a normal squadron, kind of in a similar way of how either blue or green as assaulters. You'll go to like one of the Sabre squadrons, and then you'll be assaulter for the next 3 years. And then after that, you could then essentially go to a recce detachment. They have a similar thing. We have a tactical detachment, and typically they only once you've been there 3 years and you've achieved senior operative status, then you can apply to go into the tactical detachment, because they support specifically blue and green. I was identified early on in the course in OTC, I think partly because of how I may not blend into certain areas, and also I did have a pretty decent tactical background at that point. And I think I excelled. Probably I was the leading student in our tactical phase within OTC. We actually do OTC where Delta does their selection. So I got to run those land nav courses. So that's how I know how bad that land nav course is.
Yeah. Wow.
So I get identified. So instead of within 8 months, I would say within 6 to 8 months of graduating OTC, I am officially pulled into the tactical detachment. And the best part about this is we don't go to free fall school during OTC, we go afterwards. And we get put on an OML, which is your order of list, basically. Whoever comes out of OTC, your rack and stack. And so, but if you're in the tactical detachment, you go to SWAT number 1.
Go SWAT or SWAT?
Spot or slot, number one. So I got to jump in front of people who had been waiting for years.
Oh, wow.
And then I go, so I go to free fall basic course within 9 months of graduating the course. And then I actually go to free fall jump master within a year, actually at Blue up at DevGru. I did their jump master course within a year of that. And then I spent a total of just over 3 years in the tactical detachment supporting Blue and Green.
And so with that, I mean, how tactical is it? I mean, like, are you doing, I know some of this, like, you got to be careful on how much detail you share, but like, what's the gist of how you're supporting?
So basically, if anybody understands the assaulting squadrons, and I know Blue does it slightly differently, like Green has a recce troop, Blue does it slightly differently. We spend most of our time with the recce guys. So we are with them, essentially how they prepare the battlefield. And obviously they do assaults as well. So we train to a tactical standard as much as we can, because we have other things we do. They train every single day for that job. To know enough, to be good enough to not get in the way and to keep up, because I think that's where people really do not understand the speed at those guys move. It's blinding, and you have to keep up. And you have to, most importantly, not give away. And then especially if you're doing stuff that's like silent, don't be that person who's the one who gives everybody away. So that was our job, is to be with them, to be an asset, have the same infiltration methods, have the same physical ability that we could stay with them through long operations, because, the recce guys can be out there for a while, days before the assaulters show up. And so that was our goal. And that's what always we tried to do. And just especially in the intelligence part of things, nobody beats ISA and SIGINT. So even Blue and Green have their intelligence squadrons, and most of their SIGINT guys are support guys, but nobody does it like we do. And then the fact that we combined it with our tactical ability to be with the recce guys and keep up, infiltrate with them, and always be an asset to them and not be a hindrance, is really where we sort of made our money.
Yeah. So once you graduated OTC, you jumped right into that tactical support.
Yeah, I went immediately into their pipeline, which is why I was able to get to free fall. And I was at free fall jump master, and people who I went to OTC with, I was already free fall jump master before they didn't even go to free fall basic for at least another year.
Wow.
And if I would have stayed in, I would have went to tandem schools as well.
Oh, wow.
Because that's actually one thing that we actually pride ourselves on, because we we're 2-man teams. So, and for anybody who's been at Blue or Green, like, you'll have a couple guys who are tandem qualified, but not many. But the fact that we almost out of the two of us, at least one of us is tandem, huge boon to free fall operations.
Yeah.
Because so few guys are tandem operated. Because anybody who knows what goes on, especially with the barrel and how hard that makes the tandem course, that's not a fun course.
Yeah. So you spent 3 years there, right?
Yeah.
Can you mention at all what you did or where you went or any?
So I did a couple of operations, and actually I found this out because I recently did the podcast with Brent Tucker on the Tier 1 podcast. As we were discussing prior, we actually realized that we were on an operation in Africa together.
No shit.
Yeah. So I spent most of my time with C Squadron, but I did one operation with A Squadron. And I found out that conversation that me and Brent were on an operation in Africa together.
Dude, that's wild.
Yeah.
I mean, I think most people listening can imagine what you were doing supporting, that element. Is there anything you can share about kind of what went on?
So I'll give you an example of not a specific operation, but an operation that would go down, is that we would say that they were going to assault something, maybe in a couple days. They would have the recce troop go out, and especially if there's imagine there's 2 different targets to be watching over. So a recce troop has, at least in C Squadron or in CAG, has 2 recce teams, and so they would split up and they would go. I would go with one recce troop, and my other compatriot would go with the other recce troop, and we would infiltrate with them. And then while they're doing a lot of their tactical reconnaissance, we are doing reconnaissance from, specifically from the SIGINT side of things. And we bring a whole level of like communications and a tactical suite or a SIGINT intelligence suite that we are able to do things mobile that, you know, you would find in skiffs.
Wow.
Right. And so because of this, our rucks were much bigger. If we were jumping, like I did a couple jump operations, my ruck was 125 pounds.
Wow. I mean, can you mention at all the gear that you're bringing, or is that super sensitive?
No, well, some of it's not even like, you know, like that. A lot of it is collection equipment, you know, and depending on what type of, we generally have an idea of when we go into an area what type of communications they're using, and we bring whatever the greatest suite or equipment in order to intercept or exploit that communication or whatever we might encounter in that specific area. So it could be satellite phones, it could be HF, it could be cellular. It all kind of depends on the environment. And then we bring communications equipment that we can then link back to our headquarters, because, you know, as an intelligence-centric organization, we have an entire room at headquarters of just analysts, just waiting to, like, any sort of query that we might have, they're there to get us as quickly as in-time updates, which usually with the recce team, there's a bit of a delay because of, you might have certain communication windows and how do you send that information up? And then you kind of have to piggyback that with how the recce team leader specifically did his communications, his pace plan, if you will.
Yeah. So two kind of operational questions in that regard. Similar to like military radios, like the, you know, whether PRCs or, you know, whatever the hell they're using now, companies that actually make that equipment, it has a model number or whatever. Is the stuff that you're using for SIGINT that kind of stuff, or is it like made in-house, hodgepodge, like custom-made stuff?
It's usually custom-made stuff.
Yeah, okay. Secondly, with your capability and your kind of, I mean, it sounds like it's two entities, right? You've got the CAG squadron recce guys who are, I'm assuming, using encrypted SATCOMs to communicate. Are you piggybacking off of their communications, or do you have your own way of communicating with your guys, your shop to analyze stuff?
So it depends on the situation. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So we do struggle with rural communications through, so like let's just say if I want to get back towards like NSA net and stuff like that we definitely struggle on that type of level of communications. And there we would then piggyback off of their communications, and our queries and other stuff would go and then probably go through their communication lines. And then this is always what's great about their intelligence squadrons. They've got operators, and especially their support guys are basically waiting for our information to come back, and they know how it's done. Like they have the same training that our intel analysts are done, and then they will either, and a lot of them have NSA net access, and so they will do the queries for us and come back. So definitely on missions where like more rural areas, like, you know, out in like your typical tactical reconnaissance out in the boonies, we'll be piggybacking off there. But if we're in something maybe slightly more urban, we will then be able to use our level of communications through like through the existing communications grounded network that we can code all sorts of things to get our information, you know, and things like that.
How much training and education do you get from a kind of hands-on being able to, you know, if the equipment that you're using is kind of custom made in-house one-offs, like, are you pretty up to speed on how it works, how it was designed, if there's a problem, how to troubleshoot, or are you just kind of, here's the basic of how it works, and if there's a problem, you're shit out of luck?
So it's every piece of equipment is different and is operated differently. The problem with that particular intelligence discipline is the technology changes so quickly that we actually have a sort of the way that SIGINT is trained within the unit. Because if you go to any other discipline within orange, blue, or green, the most senior guys are going to be the most advanced at it. SIGINT is the one exception to this. SIGINT is whoever is coming out of the schoolhouse at OTC are the most up to speed on SIGINT, because one thing the unit does really well is they have a team, and their whole job is to go around the world and obviously work with like the NSA, the CIA's Science Directorate. They find the latest and greatest technology and techniques and TTBs. They go back to the schoolhouse and they teach it.
Oh, wow.
So when we are back on rotation as like operatives and senior operatives, one of the things we will actually do is we will actually go over to the schoolhouse and we'll go sit on classes.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
But typically, whenever we have a mission, we will get a piece of equipment that is designed for that mission. We will then be taught on the spot. This is how you use it. This is how you go about it. Here's the graphical interfaces. Here's how you troubleshoot it. Because most of it's like the latest and greatest of whatever the NSA or the Science Directorate has come up with. And then we use it. Yeah, and we figure it out like on the fly. And a lot of times we are the cutting edge, sort of, especially for the NSA. We are definitely like their field testing element for them. Yeah. We help them design a lot of the stuff.
Yeah. How confident are you that that the equipment that we're using, not just in that space, but militarily as it relates to SIGINT and stuff like that, communications equipment, that it's not corrupted by China in terms of so many of the components? You know, even if it's made in America, like the vertical of how everything is made, like there are levels that you can only get from Chinese companies. Is that something that you guys talk about, that you try to mitigate? Is that even a thing?
It is within the, specifically within the NSA. That is something that they definitely go into, and they are very specific about where every piece of equipment is made. And it's typically made in-house. And then it's a world of hackers, and the Chinese are good, the Russians are good, we're good, and it's a battle, right? And it's a constant battle. And so every single time that they design a piece of equipment, they have to imagine, how would they break this down? How would they corrupt it? How would they look for this signature on the network?
Or how would I do it?
Exactly.
Yeah,
and so they work the problem from that angle.
I mean, so you have to have like world-class, brilliant electrical engineers and, you know, people who understand how to make stuff like that from scratch. Like, are these Army personnel? Are they contractors? Are you pulling
most
people
of them
from
are the contractors.
MIT?
We at the unit level, because we're kind of like at the operator level, we will help them design it from a certain standpoint, but we do not have, like, we have a base level of technical knowledge. Like we can construct antennas, we can do field stuff like that, but like the greater, like, this requires engineers to do this type of stuff. Not only just engineers, but like coders, like every level that was way above our intellectual level. But we do bring like, hey, this is what we see, this is how we can operate, and we help them design it from like, this is what we see on the ground, this is how we can employ it, help to design it to meet that requirement, and then we leave the rest essentially to them. And then, as an example, one of my deployments, I helped them design a new piece of equipment that was to attack a new protocol that we didn't really know how to deal with. And I spent half my deployment preparing that order for the NSA, and then when I got back, instead of immediately going on leave, I spent the first month of my back home in the NSA spaces with the engineers, helping them to develop it.
Oh, wow. Can you say, ballpark, how many of you there are at ISA Orange?
It's a very support-heavy driven organization.
So again, similar to the
probably like 300 operators, 300 operatives. Yeah, I think between the overall operation, but over 1,000
support,
1,500 support people.
Yeah. So very similar to the other tier one groups.
Yeah, it's a very large. It's a very similar organizations and like structural wise.
Yeah, I'm curious, kit wise. I know that the goal isn't to try to match, the assaulters at the other tier one groups, but at least augment and not get in their way, keep up.
Yeah.
Are you carrying all the same offensive primary, secondary equipment?
We are, because we actually, by not matching, we actually create a number of issues. Ammunition is one. Also, if one of our pieces of equipment goes down, all the repair equipment they have is only for their equipment. So typically, if you're in the tactical detachment, you're supporting both blue and green, you have kit bags for blue and you have kit bags for green.
Wow.
So when you show up, we show up in their equipment, and also we show up with the same uniforms. So even our body armor, right? If typically it's colored slightly differently between the two of them. We have to show up with a different colored body armor because, like with anything, you don't want to stand out. Like if there's a sniper, you don't want the one dude who's in the slightly different camo. I'm not trying to get
who's Captain Special over
exactly.
here?
No. So interoperability, because when we get called out, we get on our plane and we either fly to Pope, or we fly to the beach, and then we park ours right next to theirs. We jump on their plane, and that's it. Yeah. That we are now attached to them, and our support, not getting us anything physically anytime soon. So we are then dependent on their S4, their quartermasters and things like that.
Yeah. So $1 million question, because you can't ask a CAG guy who's better or a dev group guy who's better, not even necessarily who's better, but having worked with both.
Yeah.
I won't even say better. Do you have a preference?
I do.
It's midweek, you're tired, you're hungry, and somehow you end up making the same 3 meals you always make. It's comfortable, sure, but there's part of you that's been wanting something different. Something that actually feels like a real meal without the hassle of figuring it out after a long day. That's where HelloFresh has been a game changer for me. They sent me meals to try, and the thing that got me was the variety. We're talking Vietnamese, Moroccan, Caribbean, over 80 global recipes every month. Ingredients like lemongrass, gochujang, curry paste, all pre-portioned and delivered straight to your door. There's no recipe hunting, no grocery run, no stress, you just cook. And look, I use this, and you should too. When dinner is this straightforward and actually tastes this good, there's no reason to default to takeout, because nothing hits home like home cooking. Go to HelloFresh.com/MicDrop10FM now to get 10 free meals plus a free NutriBullet Ultra Plus 2-in-1 compact kitchen system. It's a $189.99 value on your third box. Free meals applied as a discount on the first box, new subscribers only, varies by plan, and you must order the third box by May 31st, 2026.
So in this, I actually think that I have because one, very people know what's an ISA. Very few people knows what blue or green. And very few people in ISA ever get in the tactical detachment. So I'm I feel like very few people who've actually seen inside all three of the big 3 tier 1 units. And I will tell you, if I was to rank the 5 tier 1 units in order of professionalism to toxicity, I would put CAG as the most professional organization.
It's not a surprise.
I would put the bottom 2 as ISA and DevGru as the most toxic.
Yeah. Well, I'm surprised to hear you say that about ISA, though.
It is, I believe, it is the nature of intelligence organizations, intelligence-centric organizations, right?
Yeah.
Because when you have assaulters and you have that sort of like tactical, there's this level of like brotherhood. It's you and me, like it's us together. Like there's that camaraderie. When you're solo or like close to solo intelligence operators, it's a different world.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of backstabbing going on in the intelligence world. It happens in the CIA. It happens in the NSA.
Are you saying, is it largely from a professionalism, career-based, just trying to get a rung up, or is it more nefarious than that?
Probably the former. I don't think a lot of times people don't really intend to be douchebags. There are a few. I think one of the issues, I really think that it really comes down to, can you spot the toxic leaders and can you weed them out? And I think it's harder in intelligence organizations to do that.
Yeah. You mentioned ranking professional to toxic, which I that's not a surprise. Your ranking system there. from a actions at the objective, do you see a huge difference between the two units?
No, blue and green are so similar. The biggest difference, and this is what I would tell you, is the biggest difference I saw between blue and green was how they treat their support. Green, sorry, so we are these SIGINT guys, right? We're there, and we are kind of considered like on the same level as the assaulters. Like that's how they treat us, right? Because they have their own SIGINT support guys. They have their intelligence squadrons where they do have operators who do learn SIGINT, but most of their SIGINT are SIGINT support guys. Green's SIGINT support guys, not only do the operators like love them, because the way they look at support is they are like, you guys enable us, and we would not be able to do our mission without you. Blue looks at their support to include their SIGINT support guys, and I would even say even their boat guys, that they're kind of a bit of a hindrance, or not necessarily a hindrance, but they're like a necessary evil. And this is the example that I'll give, is when we would eventually, because whenever we show up, we always kind of go and talk to the SIGINT support guys, because we're there to kind of like help them professionally, because we are kind of like the ultimate level as far as their career goes. Green loves their support and they're treated so well. Blue SIGINT support was scared to death of their assaulters in the Frogmen. And when I went to Freefall Jump Masters, where I really saw this. So to my knowledge, the only other people who go to Freefall in Blue is the SWIC guys, the boat guys. So half of my Freefall Jump Master course. So I was the only ISA guy there. And I brought in one of my seniors, and he actually helped instruct the course. Half the Freefall Jump Master course was Frogmen, and the other half was boat guys.
Yeah.
And they did not like each other. There was a lot of animosity between the assaulters and the boat guys, to the point where we would be doing JMPIs, and there would be a lot of insults. I would say, if I had to honestly, I would say the animosity would come from the boat guys a little bit more. You know, they're like, oh, we're just as big, we're just as tough, you know, whatever. And, you know, at the end of the day, you didn't go through selection. So like, it's kind of like this thing, but there was definitely an environment between the different support guys that I saw that they're almost treated like second-class citizens, but in green, they're treasured.
Wow.
And I think that goes a lot to that organization. Yeah. And I think even when I was having this conversation with Brent, if you actually did something to a support guy, like hazed him or something, you could lose your job.
Yeah. Well, that's disappointing to hear. You know, I wish that wasn't the case, you know,
yeah.
But.
And I will caveat, that was my experience. That's what I saw.
But
you know, it may not necessarily be, you know, always the truth, but I just, you
No,
know.
but again, I think, you know, I can't think of another guest. I mean, even, you know, there's been a few, well, actually there may only be one. There's one that I know of for sure, a guy that was at Dev Group and then went to CAG. You know, even that, like, there's going to be some bias. I think you're the only person I can think of that has as neutral of a position as you could have, having worked with both sides and being basically the same level of value to each side, and being at that level in the field, whatever. It's like, you know, it's again, I can't think of anybody that would have
the only equivalent you could probably find is probably someone from the 24th STS.
Like right? A CCT guy.
Yeah, maybe. Absolutely. Yeah. But I also, at the same time, you know, they get to live that sweet Air Force life and then come and, you know, like I got to see the dregs of even at the Army level of the Tier 1 level. And it's just also because of what goes on at ISA as well.
Yeah, so. Yeah. Before we get into that 3-year period that you were in support of the Tier 1 units as the kind of recce SIGINT guy, I am curious, you mentioned spending time in Iraq. I know that it's pretty close hold where you were and what you were doing, but of what you can share, what was that 3 years like?
So we spent a lot of time at this point going around different places with blue and green. We were in Iraq, we were in Afghanistan, we were in Africa. I mentioned I was on a mission with Brent in Africa, and we went kind of wherever they were going at the time, you know, which I think at that time a lot of that focus was Iraq, Afghanistan, or Africa. So that's where I spent majority of the time during those trips.
Did you spend more time with one than the other?
I ended up spending more time with green, actually.
Yeah. I know there's probably not an answer that you can give, but I'm curious, is there, especially with as fast as technology changes and you don't want to give any of the playbook away, but is there a most secure form of communication?
No.
Like, is anything?
No, honestly, it's ever evolving. Like we play this game of we go high tech to low tech. You know, we there's a problem, we try to skirt around it, find it, but you know, as we are trying to manipulate and exploit every type of communication, our enemies are trying to do the exact same things. Yeah. So it's always it's an ever evolving thing. You know, frequency hopping radios. You know, even that technology itself evolves into, you know, its most present day form. So there isn't like the greatest, and then especially on the clandestine side of things, you know, that is where really things really evolve. You know, you're using virtual computers inside of a computer, you know, you know, in order to hide, you know, something, you know, it's like, it's all sorts of things. Honestly, the only way that you can really protect your communications and your devices is breaking things down to its most simplest form, which is RF energy. And how do you stop RF energy? Electromagnetic caging, or basically Faraday cages. Right, you can shield because it just stops the RF energy. You know, that's one way to do it, right? But it's how you protect things. There's just so many different methods to do things, and it's a cat and mouse game constantly.
So all right, so once you left there, the next phase of your career was what?
It was 2014, and it was when the ISIS invasion into Iraq kicked off. So at that point, I had just achieved senior operative status in the unit, and they were looking to send we were going to send a team in, and alongside Delta was going to send a troop in. We were going to be the first Americans back in, and I was chosen to be one of the team leaders, partly because of I spoke Farsi, and I had plenty of experience when it came to Iraq. So I was chosen to be the team leader, and I went back in, and Delta went in to kind of run the air campaign to fight ISIS. And as at this time, the only thing really slowing ISIS down was the Shia militias, which were being run by Iran. We were there for them.
Which is especially interesting given what's taking place right now.
Yeah.
With the Farsi, you went through that language school quite a few years earlier. Did you have to keep it up to maintain a certain qualification?
Randomly, I didn't have to, because if anybody's, you know, remembers our deployments to Iraq, right? And, you know, there was some Farsi was used, but even if you were a Arabic linguist, we didn't use you. We used Cat 3 interpreters. We used native board because you know, they understood the nuances of what was being said in the language, as the culture. Yeah. You know, it's hard for us white boys to, you know, understand when someone's saying something that may not mean, but we may not be able to pick it up. Either we don't know the accent well enough, we don't know the dialect well enough. Yeah. So it's really, really hard. So we had like test waivers for years. Like, I didn't have to take a DLP or my language test for probably close to like 8 years after I took my first one. So we were just giving language waivers.
So when you found yourself back in Iraq, but working with Iranian Shia militias, did you remember it well enough to at least be able to communicate?
Yeah, it was a quick study to get back up into it and stuff like that.
And what was that like, working with Iranian Shia militias fighting ISIS after? Because they were kind of the boogeyman a little bit when we were in Iraq, of, you know, all these EFPs and IEDs that are coming across that are Quds Force and IRGC guys are responsible for killing a lot of American soldiers in Iraq. What was that feeling like?
Well, so one, it was difficult because one, we needed them. But two, we also understood the longer threat they were going to pose, because we knew that since we deposed the Saddam Hussein and the Ba'ath Party, that government was run by Sunnis, that the Shias had sort of taken over, and then obviously the kind of capital of the Shia religion is Tehran. There technically is an Ayatollah who's within Iraq, but he doesn't nearly have the same influence that the one in Iran does. So the level of Iranian influence inside of Iraq at that point was huge, but it wasn't solidified. Like, they didn't for sure control the government. This was going to allow them to officially make Iraq their puppet government. We knew this was going to happen. This was a part of the Ayatollahs, part of Qasem Soleimani's like great plan to, create the Pax Iranica, the great Iranian empire. Because really, Iraq was really the only thing that was standing in the way of their complete weapon pipeline from Lebanon to Syria to Iran. Iraq was the only thing holding it up. And now they had the opportunity to take it because Iraq was going to fall without them. So we were there to be prepared to combat that influence. And we didn't know, but we weren't, it was complicated because we still needed them. So that was a very complicated issue. So
how did you guys handle them?
In most long-form intelligence strategies is we basically prepared to exploit all their communications, how to track them. I will point out that in 2014, I helped pioneer tracking of Soleimani's aircraft.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And in 2020, if you remember how he got killed, which was leaving his aircraft in Baghdad.
Wow. I
was out of the unit at this point. And obviously things may have changed slightly, but I definitely helped pioneer.
Dude, that's awesome, man.
Yeah, some of the beginning TTBs for that.
Yeah. What was your overall impression of them competency-wise?
They are effective in their own way, but they're also still, they can't play the game like we can, right? But because we limit ourselves through our American values, they only exist because, we sort of like let them almost in a way because, we're not trying to, exterminate them from the world, right? Israel feels slightly differently about this, but they are definitely, they're competent in a lot of different ways, but they lack a number of different things. They don't have the level of funding that we do. In this parallel can be drawn between any of our partner forces like Australian SAS, British SAS. They just fail. The funding is a huge portion of that, and they do what they can, but they're not as on top of the level of lack of funding. They're not as good at it as we are. We just been doing this for much longer, and we wrote the playbook. Obviously, there's a KGB playbook, which mostly is about honeypotting, but in their intelligence service is really a combination of our intelligence service and the KGB, and so that's how they run their operations. Luckily, their assassination attempts have failed quite a bit. They definitely struggle to operate outside of the Middle East because what they do is outside of the Middle East, outside of Lebanon, outside of Yemen, even outside of Palestine, what they do is they go around the world and they try to find people who are not fans of us. And then they, like, hey, we'll offer you money, we'll give you influence, all these different things so they can sort of gain a foothold or whatever. Like an example of this is the largest embassy in Mexico is the Iranian embassy.
Just because it's near here.
Yeah. So and these are like one of these things, but they struggle because there's a number of different reasons why they struggle on this. To operate in just like how we operate in their part of the world. And Israel's done this. We need foreign nationals from that country then to operate. It's definitely harder for the Iranians to find like Americans to be like turned operatives, right? Yeah. So they're in here operating, and people were already kind of looking at. So they're kind of behind the game in that particular portion. If I had to, one of their issues why they struggle operating outside the Middle East right now.
Were you interacting with them from me to you? Like, were you speaking with them?
No, not really.
Not really.
No.
I mean, was there ever a time where you were within the same room or
yes.
That distance?
Or within the next room?
I guess, like, did you meet them, like handshake, interact that way?
Not anybody really of note.
Okay.
I definitely met some, but for me personally, My focus was actually Qasem Soleimani.
Okay. I guess I'm just, the reason I ask, I'm curious, like from the just man to man, like the feeling that you get from somebody when you meet them, that, you know, because a lot of times you can tell immediately, like, this guy wants to fucking kill me.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like in that kind of way, did you
No,
get...
there was. Okay. So when we did have to deal with the Shia militia, so one thing, their advisors, the IRGC advisors, the Codes Force advisors, sometimes they're hard to spot who is one of their advisors within the Shia militias, because they do blend very, very well. There is a couple times where I'm very certain that I spotted the Codes Force advisor from Department 400, and definitely had the eyes that they want, because they're especially within the IRGC and then the Codes Force. They are definitely a very radicalized group. They definitely believe, just like we do. We believe in a lot of the things that what America stands for. They do it probably to even another level. Yeah. And you can see it. It's hard for them to find in their eyes. Even well trained, when you see somebody who just like
absolutely hates you.
Yeah, you can sort of see it in their eyes. And it actually is, now that I think about it, a little bit of a giveaway, right?
Yeah, yeah. How long were you there? And I guess that chapter of your career, how long did that last?
I think about 8 years.
8 years, wow. And that entire time, what are you doing?
Mostly, outside of the 3 years in the tactical detachment, most of it are doing operations clandestinely.
Yeah. What can you share about any of that?
We do things similar to the way the CIA does things, which is the whole point of that job is getting in places before we need to be in those places, having access to targets before we decide to have access to pull the trigger on those targets. So I'll give an example, and this is neither confirmation or denial of our involvement or anybody else's involvement. Maduro, Venezuela, access was already in Venezuela years prior to that operation. Right. And so that is what organizations like mine, with like the CIA, is we try to plan when are we, and so a lot of times we're out there doing really nothing, like, at least as far as like, depending on your perspective, but we're just trying to gain access where we think we're going to need it one day, or gain sources where we think that this will be useful one day. So it's a lot of like pre-planning and guessing where we need to be, and developing targets that may end up never being actioned or even looked at eventually. So it's not a very sexy job, I'll be honest.
So if you had a business card and it had a title on it, the title would be "In Case Some Shit."
In case you want me to make friends so you can talk to them a year down the road, right? I can make some friends, but I need time.
Yeah.
Or finding people,
right?
Like hunter tracker. Think of it like that.
Can you mention where all you were, or any of the places you were?
Really, I think keep it to continents.
Yeah.
South America, Africa. I probably spent majority of my deployments in Africa.
Oh wow.
Or in that area, water-wise, stuff like that. Also in Asia and also Europe.
In the continents that you spent time, was it all over the place, or was it generally in a similar location? Or within one country of that continent?
No, it was pretty spread out.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. We definitely say that one advantage is that we get to go to a lot of places that other people are not going to, because they're not really being looked at. Like, most of what, and then obviously there's exceptions, because, like Blue and Green most send their guys for like embassy duties and stuff like that. So they get to go to places like that. But we're usually in places where like nothing's really going on yet, but we're trying to see if maybe this might be a place where we need to be.
Yeah.
Things like that.
From your experience, did you see a heavy Chinese influence in everywhere you went, where kind of you hear about in the media of the kind of economic clause that they have into so many other places in the world that I don't think a lot of Americans realize?
They're everywhere.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that will surprise people the most is Africa is heavily influenced by China. Like almost every country, they have their hands in it. Almost every industry in every country you go into in Africa, China has their hands in it.
So here's a question that Well, you know what? I'll come back to it because it's going to lead to probably a 20 or 30-minute discussion afterwards. But it's about China and their clause in so many places. But so in that kind of 5-year period, what or how long does a typical deployment look like? And is it always or almost always under alias?
Majority of them were under alias.
Do you have to pick a different one every time?
Well, it depends. If you're going back to the same area, you do not, right?
Okay.
Obviously. But certain ones are designed for certain things in different areas. And sometimes if you don't have one that doesn't fit, then might create a new one for you. So it's always trying to figure out what can at least give you access to that area without, making it completely and utterly obvious.
Is there a typical length, or is it just totally varied?
That is definitely where it depends.
Yeah.
So some of the operations that are more human-centric, like if you're going to be on the ground for more of a human access-centric, those typically are a little bit longer.
Like months?
Yeah, at least months. Most deployments are like 90 days.
Okay.
So we do try to go that kind of concept. It's a sprint, right? And then for the human side of things, especially for running sources, you can still do that within 90 days. You just have to have good handovers. Sometimes those ones will go 6 months.
Yeah.
Maybe there are situations they slightly go longer, but typically the really human-centric are like 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
But they do try to keep it back because you're on cycles, and because, and this is the biggest thing with tier 1 units is like during like times like this, like the tier 2 units are really, they're not doing all that much. They're still going on JSETs, other things like that. The tier 1, we never stop. It doesn't matter if it's peacetime or it's not. We're out there, we keep going. It just never stops. It's 9 months out of the year. And then the 3 months you are home, you're on call.
I assume you don't have much of a personal life.
Did not. I didn't even honestly realize it until someone asked me about it.
Yeah. Could you put a ballpark number on how many different aliases that you've had to maintain over your career? Dozens?
No, I don't think it's actually quite that many, but it's probably close to 10.
Yeah. I imagine for me, it would be, I could see myself having difficulty after a while keeping them separate. Like, did you ever find yourself like having to remind yourself like, shit, was that this guy or was it this one? I can't, and like blending them accidentally.
You can't. Luckily, they were kind of well separated. Like when I was on a mission, then I kept going back and forth on that particular. I didn't really jump around that much.
Okay.
So, but the biggest issue, because that is an issue, it actually more corresponds to your alias back to you in your real life.
Like accidentally mentioned something real.
Honestly, the most common gaffe that people do is like, you'll be gone, you're somebody for so long, and then you come back and you'll be like, ordering your food at Starbucks or a food truck, and you're like, oh, what's the name for the order? And then you give the other name,
But I was going to ask, in your personal life, did you ever find that where like you meet somebody and you introduce yourself as one of your aliases accidentally?
I don't know if I ever did that at home. I think it helped that I had no personal life at this point.
Yeah. So
I think that it's probably the thing that helped the most for me not to run into that. Yeah, it was an interesting time. There were definitely some close calls. Definitely sometimes getting it confused. But there were some people who definitely were on the longer type deployments that, especially over a 2-3 year period, spent maybe 60-70% of their time as somebody else. And that definitely became an issue, especially for people who are married.
Well, I was going to ask, one, is that typical, your kind of situation of not having much of a personal life for guys in that unit? And for the some or few that are married, or like what do you tell your parents or your siblings, or like how much leeway do you have, if any?
Very little.
So you have to lie to them?
Basically, yeah.
How would a married guy, so he's got to lie to his wife? I mean,
So they do a decent job. They do give the wives a brief.
and children, if they're of a certain age, I assume. Yeah.
And they tell them enough to where like, hey, this is important. And the unit that your dad, mother, whatever works at, right? Don't ask any questions.
Yeah.
Just leave it at that. Like, and if someone starts asking questions, then they're like, hey, report that to your, whoever it is, and then help us within that particular situation.
I mean, with life and relationships being what they are, like sometimes they get messy. People get divorced. They get, a woman scorned. Like, did you ever see any issues of like a pissed off spouse that caused problems intentionally, or like outed their husband because they were upset at something he did in their relationship? Or
We have seen that, but I think one good thing that they did, and I think it would have been more prevalent if they didn't do this, they scared the death out of the spouses.
Like, you will go to prison.
Well, I think more than, I think a lot of, like, for a lot of us, right, there's this illusion about what we do, right? And they think it's so sexy, super cool that we're like these assassins, right? And I think that's where one point where this worked in our favor, that our spouses, because we didn't tell them much, right? So their minds started like, okay, like these are like skilled assassins, and like the government will, it's seen too many movies, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like a lot of the times where it probably could have been worse was a deterrent, because they were afraid of what the unit would do to them.
Yeah.
So, but there was definitely a case or two where somebody did, and it had to be cleaned up very quickly, because especially that unit, just even the disclosure of one of their locations
Could burn tons of people.
Yeah, because it's not like blue or green. It's not, these places are not like there. Like you would not know it even if you drove in front of it.
Wow. Were there, to your knowledge, any instances of spouses or family members being approached by intelligence assets, like they had connected those dots and they approached them?
It's very common, actually.
Really?
Yeah. Well, it's more common than you think, but it doesn't happen like it's like every single day.
Right.
We have to remember, in the military district of Washington area, this is the capital of not only of the most powerful country in the world, right? Like this is basically the capital of intelligence and counterintelligence. Every nation has their intelligence operatives here, and everybody is playing the proverbial spy game, counter intel and intel. And we estimate that there are probably at least, through all the different countries in the world, probably at least 100,000 different intelligence operatives that live in this area, right? It might be a slight exaggeration, but it's like
There's a lot.
There's a lot, right? And that's what you have to understand. Everybody that you may meet in this area
Could be one.
Yeah, and you think about how we do operations, how we employ defense attachés, how the chief of station in every single country works. Every nation doesn't have to be that subtle about it when dealing with us.
Yeah.
Everybody just comes here, and you can assume that almost every diplomat and every other embassy has some training of some level.
Yeah.
Wow.
In that 5-year period, anything else you can mention, and or what came after that?
The 5-year period of being
So you had
within
the 3
unit.
years in the tactical unit, the 5 years.
Just, it really became my focus. And we could say the unit's focus was Iran and the Quds Force. So wherever we believed that they were influencing and wherever we could counter, we were trying to be there, right? And this is where this is where, especially with recent issues, Joe Kent, his wife, I was never in the same squadron as, I met him a couple times at jumps. He had a really good reputation, but we definitely worked the same target sets during that time.
And did you, what made you leave that unit before we get into kind of the current event stuff and all the different correlations that you have? What was the process where you left that section of the unit, and what did you do after?
So it was because of a conversation that I had. if I had not had this conversation, I probably would have done what most guys do, especially within the tactical detachment, which is finish your 20 years there and then go to ground branch after that, because that's what kind of what the wheels have been greased for that type of thing. So at that time, the unit had a CW5, and he was a ranger in a Green Beret in the 80s. He became a pilot, went to 160th, and he was one of the pilots in Black Hawk Down. Actually, I think he got a Silver Star because he was the third helicopter that got hit, and he actually limped it back to the airfield, was able to crash land it, but after he let the guys off the ropes. And his helicopter was recovered and is actually in the Aviation Air Museum Fort Rucker, and it has his name on it.
Yeah, that's cool.
So this man is now the CW5 of our unit. And he was a Golden Knight too.
Oh, wow.
So, and when he was a Green Beret, he was actually on a dive team and a free fall team. Like this man's dress uniform was stupid.
Yeah.
So he's like a legend, and he's been in like, how many centuries. So he liked me, and he came up to me one day in the gym, and he asked me like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm doing legs." And he's like, "No, with life, you fucking idiot." And I'm like, okay. I was like, well, I'm going to finish this, and then, probably go down, like to go down to ground branch, get to do the real work, right? With the less restrictions. And he was like, do not do that. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, dude, look around you. Look at everybody who's senior to you. Look at all the E8s and the E9s, because we were very E8 and E9 heavy. How many of them are divorced? How many have a relationship with their children? And he looks coldly at me, and he's like, what's your personal life like? And this was the first moment I'd ever I realized I didn't have one, and I hadn't had one for, we're coming up on a decade. And, I never thought about it like that. And he goes, I'm still pondering this. And he's like, have you ever wanted to fly? I was like, yeah, who doesn't? He's like, if you've done this, he's like, the military can offer you so many different things. They'll literally teach you how to fly for free. He's like, go do it. He's like, don't stay here. And that conversation really hit me, especially the part that I didn't have a personal life. Because I never thought about it. And then I started thinking about, what was I missing in life? What was I sacrificing for? Oh, and the other part he brought up, and I don't think it touched this. He's like, when you're done, he's like, what are you going to have to show for this? 30 years? Like, who's, you think you're going to get paid a lot? Trust me, you don't. Right? And he's like, as you get senior in this type of work, it gets worse. Like the first 5 years of these units is the best time. Once you start getting to like senior level, especially when you get taken off the road, you're going to hate your life. So in combination with this,
how old were you at this point?
I would have been 31, 32. And I was actually one of the youngest members in the unit. So I think most people in the unit are in their early 30s. I finished OTC at 27.
Oh, wow.
And that actually was something I actually brought up at the board, because I know there was a concern, because I was like the youngest person in OTC. But I addressed it. So, they didn't say no. So, and then it was a combination of this, and there was another event that happened. There was a command sergeant major of a squadron who ended up getting fired. It got put on his record for abuse of power. One of the worst, probably events of the unit of toxic leadership, because even to the point where the unit CSM apologized to the whole unit that this went on for so long.
What was it?
Basically, this guy would have, we call them fuck you meetings. And he would basically find somebody he didn't like, and he would call his whole staff in and be like, let's get rid of this guy. I actually became the target of this. And when I filed an IG complaint, what I ended up finding out, I was the 6th IG complaint against this. And mind you, how many of these guys didn't file IG complaints? So how many? There were dozens, right? And then somebody after me, while my IG complaint was going through, he pissed off somebody on her staff, because that's actually, I got warned before this even happened. So a member of the staff came down to me like, hey, call IG now. He's like, he's like, we just had a fuck you meeting about you. I was like, okay. So I called IG. So luckily I'd already I already talked to IG. IG was already waiting when I got called in his office randomly.
Do you know what his issue with you was?
It was a personal issue. He basically called me in and he told me, he's like, hey, I need you to fill out a 4187, which is, you're asking to leave the unit. He's like, I'm going to PCS you to leave the Army. And I went back, told the IG exactly what he said, because obviously I was warned about this meeting. And he was like, yeah, do not do that. He's trying to make it look like you're asking to leave the unit. Like, right. He's like, he has no power to do what he's doing, right? He can't PCS you to the Army because, one, when you go to that type of unit, you actually cannot leave until you're told to. Like, you actually can stay. If you're in the Army, you can stay there your entire career. He said, you can't do this. So anyways, he ended up pissing off somebody else during this process. And there's another process because the IG complaints take a while. This particular person is actually the same person who warned me about the staff, was able to bring in a colonel lawyer from the JAG and JSOC and was able to raise the issue. And the investigation happened. It was over in 2 weeks and he was fired for abuse of power.
Wow. Do you know what his personal issue with you was?
No, so this is what this is what a lot of people think about this particular guy. So I'll just say that this guy, his nickname was the Shermanator, if anybody remembers American Pie. This is what this dude looked like. He had this sort of insecurity about him, and anybody who may have came off as maybe seemed cooler, more competent than he was. He was just this walking dude of insecurities. I just never understood it. He was 6'6", tall dude, had been a lot of different places, just didn't get it. And I wasn't the only target of this. He'd target multiple people. And for some reason, I think maybe because I was not the quietest person when it came to things happened and I disagreed with it, I definitely let that known, because that's a trait that I picked up from my father. Because my father was definitely the type of person who put your men before yourself. My father was supposed to be an 06, but never made it because he would constantly put the men underneath his command before him, and he got blackballed because of it. And that's always why I'm always a fan of Pete Blaber and his book, The Mission, the Men and Me. And that's the way my father taught me how leadership is done. And that's kind of when I saw things, especially on one of these Iraq deployments, somebody was basically trying to, there was a sort of an injustice going on with one of my junior members of my team, and I fought it and created a rift between us and the other team, and came back as basically just a personality issue, a conflict. Well, he, for some reason, took that as an issue, took it into a certain level, and then this man, not only does he pin an award on me the week prior for what I did on that deployment, and then a week later he has a fuck you meeting about me. Just duplicitous, backstabbing. And this goes back to the nature of those intelligence organizations, is just what I end up seeing. And in my career, it was the worst display of toxic leadership I've ever seen. And then luckily, after this whole thing happens, he gets fired. I actually go and have a one-on-one meeting with a unit command sergeant major, and he apologizes to me.
Wow. And so that was part of what led to you going to...
I decided that based off of everything, and plus I'd been there so long, I was just and also I realized that I was coming up on my limit for age and time in service to even go to warrant officer school, because the cutoff is 33.
Oh, wow.
Which I ended up having, because my packet actually ended up getting delayed by a few months. I actually had to do a waiver for both time in service and age, but I got approved. I ended up being the oldest person in flight school, but
How was going to flight school after all that?
It was definitely an adjustment. Luckily, I think outside of special operations, aviation is the next best branch. But the warrant officer school in the Army, outside of special forces warrants, every warrant officer goes there. So you have your cook warrants, your supply warrants. So you definitely see a whole new walk of life that, I'd been in special operations my entire career, never really been around the regular Army type stuff. And I definitely struggled the first couple days with some of because your initial, because warrant officer school is like a gentleman's course, right? And the instructors of the initial portion of where you're getting yelled at the first couple of days or the first day, or like cooking supply warrants, and just interesting individuals that I was like, did I make a mistake coming here? But luckily, when we started the schoolhouse portion of the school, and my first the history teacher there was a 1/60th guy, and he was like a black belt in jiu-jitsu, looked like Jason Statham. I think his claim to fame is he's the youngest CW5. He was like a street to seater. I think he made CW5 like 32 years old. Wow. Awesome guy. He actually ended up pinning me in my warrant officer graduation, but he's the first one who's like, hey, it gets better. Yeah. Don't you worry. Warrant officer school is stupid. You'll get through it and be fine. And he was absolutely right.
So you go through that. You go through flight school. What comes after that?
So I went to warrant officer school in 2019. Went into the basic course for aviation. I actually had to go to SEER school again randomly. It was my fourth SEER school. But the basic course at that time, you learn how to fly the UH-72 Lakota. And then after you graduate from there, then you go on to your advanced airframe, which I ended up getting the Black Hawk, the Mike model, which is the glass cockpit, which is basically the computerized version of the Black Hawk. So around this time, this was now 2020, and COVID basically hits. And I had a booming real estate investment business in Baltimore, but majority of my tenants during this time didn't have to pay their rent because there was like a reprieve during this time. And landlords had it for a little bit, but the banks, before my tenants, especially because they were in Baltimore, the banks were requiring me to send money. And I had like 30 properties.
Wow.
And I had never planned for this, that I would have to be paying majority of my properties out of pocket. And quickly I ran out of money. And so I was going through financial issues at this. And then at this point, I had aggravated one of my flight instructors, who then accused me of parking in the wrong parking lot. So mind you, that this is not like, if you park in a teacher parking lot, they might like yell at you, whatever. This is not really an offense that really gets much traction, much less you get kicked out of flight school for it. They tried to kick me out of flight school for this offense, right? And I know this wasn't the largest surprise, because about 2 months prior, when I first started the Black Hawk course, my sister had died. And then my father was terminally ill. So this is the second time I've been on emergency leave during flight school. And when I left the second time, the senior flight instructor in that course, who for some reason had a bit of a Napoleon complex, didn't get along with, apparently have a face that you want to punch. He told my classmates when I rolled out to go see my father, he's like, I'm going to get this kicked out of flight school. And everyone's like, why? And then people started texting me. And he told this to multiple people. I didn't think much of it. So when eventually I come back to the course, I actually get rolled back into his class, like the next evolution of his class. And I didn't think much of it, because I was like, whatever. He doesn't like me. I don't care, right? He accuses me of parking in the wrong parking lot, and they start my drop packet. I have to go through this whole process, end up having to write letters to Congress. Huge ordeal. But what ended up happening is now, and I didn't realize this at the time, that I had tied my identity to three things. One, I was this former tier 1 operator. Another, that I was this super successful businessman. And now that I was a pilot. Within a short amount of time, combined with the death of both my father and my sister, I'd lost all three of these things. I was no longer these three things. And I was embarrassed. I didn't know how to deal with it. I'd never been depressed before. I don't think I'd ever really failed at anything before. And I spiraled quickly. I stopped talking to people. So I was embarrassed, because I had so many people who looked up to me who thought I was this person who was successful in all these different things. How could I talk to them if I wasn't these things anymore?
So you did get kicked out of flight school for that?
No. So there was a whole process of I had to go down this whole thing, and eventually was able to get some sort of a level of reprieve for this whole thing. And then,
but it was during that.
It was this whole thing. So, and the reason why I bring this up is because while I'm going through this process of going through this to get myself reinstated into flight school, because this took a year, and for the first time in my life, I hit rock bottom, and I decided that I was going to commit suicide, and I made a plan. And I had a time and place and exactly how I was going to do it, where I was going to do it. And I was going to do it after my best friend's wedding, who I was a bridesmaid for, randomly enough. But the only reason I didn't do it was because of my dog.
Wow.
Because, I was her whole world. And she, how selfish it would have been me to leave her in this world, right? She's only got so little time. And then later, as I would, obviously pull myself out of this whole situation, I would realize that, committing suicide is like one of the selfish things that you can do. You cause generational trauma to anybody who's ever loved you. And that is really where I had learned about Stoicism. And this is where I really started to use the tenets of like, you control when things happen to you, you control how you react to them. And I used that as my foundation to crawl my way out of the hole that I dug for myself. And day by day, I just did something that would make myself better. And eventually, I would pull myself out of this. And the other thing that I realized during this time, because I feel like one of the issues that I had is I never really failed at much. Obviously, there were times they wouldn't let me go to selection, but I'd fail at it, right? Like I'd succeeded at everything I tried. I don't think I'd really experienced what failure was, and to really understand what failure really is, which is it's how you really truly build success through, failures, right? If you achieve success, like it's kind of like without failure, it's kind of volatile. Like true success is built on the mountains of failure. And what I truly, really understood about this situation was that this was the biggest series of failures of my life. And this, what I look back at today, is like, this was the catalyst that turned me into the man that I've always wanted to become.
Wow.
And is one of the reasons between the toxic leaders that I experienced in the military, and then I knew this was going to be sort of my purpose, and that I wanted to help people to try to understand topics that we don't want to talk about, help people so they don't fall into the issues that I could have, that I was, and that understand that like it's okay to talk about it, because we don't talk about it. Because especially at the time, going to mental health, either in SOF or aviation, was a death sentence for your career.
Yeah.
So that's why, fast forwarding to towards the end of my career, 6 months before I retired is when I decided to create my YouTube channel. And I created it, and it's called the Stoic Viking because, one, Stoicism was sort of the foundation of how I sort of interact with the chaos within the world. And then also, our whole life has been built on sort of warrior philosophies, whether it's Spartan, Viking, samurai, Bushido, all these different things. Like the warrior philosophies combined with some of the ancient philosophies like Stoicism, I felt were sort of the combination of the foundation that I used to deal with life and how I looked forward, and sort of my purpose going there forward after that.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's an incredible journey from when you were at rock bottom until you retired. How long of a window of time was that?
Over a year.
All right. So since you can't get into that too much, and we'll kind of finish up with the Stoic Viking and kind of what you're doing now. What I'd love to get into is, because you spent so much time in such a relevant field and area of operations, specifically to what's going on in Iran right now, generally speaking, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So Iran, I feel there's a lot of different ways to look at this. Iran is a problem. The Islamic Republic is a problem for a number of different issues. They are a generational issue. The Islamic Republic has one goal, and that is death to Israel and death to America. If a country like that, who believes it's within their religious dogma or doctrine that it's, they're doing things on the right side of God in order to eliminate us, I think it's naive of us to not believe them that this is their intention. Right? So how do you go about this? And this is really the question. I believe that we spent our political capital in Iraq, and we don't have the political capital to invade Iran. Even though, looking back on it, that would have been a much better option to invade Iran than to invade Iraq, right? Because we not only did we empower Iran by invading Iraq, like we created a whole multitude of issues, but the Iranian people are, by far, in my personal opinion, a boon to the rest of the world, just as a culture, a society. Like, they're very hardworking people. They're very intelligent. Like, if you ever meet Persians, outside of a country Iran, they're always successful. They're almost always doctors, just very intelligent, very good people. And, what was going on before the Islamic Revolution, obviously we had an ally within Iran, but the Shah was using the Savak, which is like their secret police organization. He was doing some bad stuff. He was killing political rivals. He was eliminating people. People within the country did not feel like they could protest and not, be whisked away by the Savak. So there's a reason why that Islamic Revolution ended up happening. But, like with a lot of political issues, we think that this other group who's saying great things is going to be better. But what ended up happening was they traded one authoritarian dictator for authoritarian theocratic regime, and have a bit of buyer's remorse.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, especially nowadays, the majority of the population supports a regime change. But the problem is the IRGC is so embedded into the government, into its economic structures, that in order for the regime to fall, you have to eliminate the IRGC.
And numbers-wise, that's hundreds of thousands of troops, right?
It is. So the IRGC is probably 160,000, but then they also have incorporated, they have the Besiege, which is like their militant group. And I've heard the reports of them being up to like 600,000, right? And then you've got, they have two separate militaries. You have the IRGC and then you have the normal military, which is called the Artesh. And each one of them have their own navy, they have their own air force, they have their own ground forces. And because the Islamic Republic knows that the Artesh, which the IRGC was created to watch over the Artesh, that they have implanted IRGC loyalist officers in the command structure of the Artesh, just because they're afraid, because that's their greatest threat to them outside of us landing troops is the Artesh, and they know that. So they, whenever they have all these protests, they shut off communications with, so they can't coordinate, and they basically keep eyes on as many of the commanders of the Artesh, through their loyalist officers have been playing. And they try to increase the numbers of the loyalist officers within the Artesh.
Do you think that it's at all realistic for us to, beyond hope, like assume or, put any stake into the Artesh and the people from a capability standpoint being able to overthrow and institute a coup where they actually can take the country over, and we wouldn't need boots on the ground to accomplish that?
I think that there is a case. It will be extremely difficult, though.
Because of the leadership that's embedded? The
leadership, not only that, but I don't think that, so there's a lot of celebration going on, especially among the Iranian diaspora, which is the Persians living outside of Iran. And they're celebrating, and they're like, this is awesome. They're attacking the thing. They're attacking the IRGC. They're attacking the Islamic Republic. These people, this is their way of life. These are radical fanatics. They are not going down without a fight. For this to happen, I don't think they understand how many thousands and thousands of them are going to have to die for this to go down without us doing boots on the ground. I think the only way for this to legitimately happen, in my personal opinion, without us committing political suicide, is for them to enable them to do this. But how many times have these protests happened? How many times have we done strikes against them? Or how many times has Israel done strikes? This is just one iteration of this particular issue. I think eventually that this regime will get weakened, and I think the people will eventually rise up. I'm losing hope that it is going to be this time.
So I guess from a kind of a theoretical standpoint or a principle standpoint, maybe is a better way to put it, do you agree with what we're doing, when we're doing it, and how we're doing it?
I do. I do think that these strikes are good. I think that there is, there's a lot of question about whether or not, because Israel wanted to do the strikes and, we kind of jumped in on it because of they were going to do it. And if they didn't do it, we were going to get retaliated against regardless, because Iran doesn't see a difference between us and them. But if by us jumping in on it, we could essentially make the strikes more effective, kill enough of their response, and essentially minimize the number of casualties we could have, right? And then also, this has been a part of it. We've been wanting this for over a decade. So like the concept where people are like, oh, Israel's controlling us. Like, no, we're kind of like allies. We saw an objective. There was a situation. Israel probably initiated it, like there's that argument there, right, to a certain extent. But it is still something that we wanted, right? And they do have a program where they are trying to make nuclear weapons. However far that is, that's always debatable. But my personal opinion is you don't wait till somebody who doesn't have nukes, you don't wait till they get nukes to stop them. That's kind of a bad idea.
Yeah, I mean, they've been 2 weeks away since the mid-90s.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and I think that by eliminating their ballistic missile program, or at least setting it back, setting back their drones, setting back their Navy, you do definitely diminish their capability to affect, to basically affect the world outside of their own borders, right? The Strait of Hormuz, things like that. So I think that is good. And whatever their nuclear program is, I think it's definitely getting set back a number of years. And I think we are giving the Iranian people a window of opportunity. Whether they take it or not this time, that's another story. But I think that as long as he walks away without putting boots on the ground, and I was a little worried about these pilots that went down, because if they got caught, how much of an issue that would be. But luckily they didn't. But I think if we end up doing boots on the ground, I think that's where I would definitely disagree with. That's probably a bridge too far.
Yeah. So put yourself in Trump's shoes up until, at least as we sit here and boots aren't on the ground. Would you have done the same things that he's done the way that he's done them?
I think so. I personally agree with the strikes in its limited capacity. Like, I think that doing strikes and because I don't think that we should, because one, if we were to do boots on the ground, one, like I said, it'd be like, I think, political suicide. We'd also ruin any legitimacy that new regime had, because we're the ones who installed it. No matter how great the intentions were, people are like, no, it's just another, we need the Iranian people to take the country back. And that definitely makes it much, much harder.
Yeah. One of the things on the Israel issue as to, whether or not they kind of forced our hand, would you have predicted that would have been an issue prior to us doing what we're doing, that using that excuse that, well, they would have retaliated anyway? Like, do you share that perspective? So
I think that there is some truth to it, right? We definitely could have let them do it and then just waited for the consequences, right? I think that from what I have seen, I think that Trump, in my experience and what I think, is that he was kind of looking for an excuse to do it anyways. Because...
Why do you think?
I think that there's always been a danger of Iran getting too powerful, and they're always in a process of like, hey, between their Quds Force and their proxies getting stronger, their nuclear program getting stronger, their Navy's been getting stronger, their ballistic missile program, their drone programs have been getting much, much stronger. And it was going to get to a point of, at what point do they become hard to contain at that point? So I think that this could have been an excuse. I don't know for sure, but to basically, let's set them back a few years while we still try to deal with this.
Yeah, I guess the tough part, I think, about international politics and military operations is that, there's what's strategically the most advantageous, and then there's from a garnering support amongst allies and kind of the public opinion of the rest of the world, which we're seeing right now, the lack of that, of not being able to use military bases to launch from, or getting any type of assistance for trying to regulate or have any authority in the straits, is that what's the most politically effective may and oftentimes is not the most strategically effective. Like, those two things can be at odds, this being a classic example. Having said that, I think to preemptively strike without at least one retaliatory strike, not that you want to leave people as bait or as a sitting duck, but I mean, to me, that is kind of the crux of legitimizing what we're doing, is saying, like, they attacked us, like, even if you say, Israel, you're on your own, if you're going to do it, do it. Yeah. The instant they start to retaliate, then, but it's like almost a legal issue, which I hate that that's even a thing, in war fighting, but there is an element of that that I think that does delegitimize what we're doing by not having something that they've done. Now, not naive to the fact that, I mean, when we were in Iraq, there was, to me, if there was a time to legitimize what we're doing now, it was then. Yeah. On the same token, strategically, that would have been a nightmare, because imagine the amount of drone attacks on FOBs, and like, there were so many targets in Iraq that it would have been an absolute bloodbath. So it wouldn't have been smart to do it. But from a justification standpoint, I do feel like we were far more justified then than we are now.
And I would completely agree. And I think that's one of the shames of what we did in Iraq, because it's caused a whole number of issues, just cascaded, to our a numerous number of failures in the Middle East, which has led to Syria, the rise of Iran, because if Iraq was actually keeping Iran in check.
Yeah, if we hadn't done what we'd done, the political landscape of the Middle East would be vastly different.
Yeah, completely different. And, one thing you say, like, about Saddam Hussein, he definitely, of all his failings, one thing that he did do that I think that was probably not the worst is that he had a bit of a secular government, right? Like, was he like a lot of other nations in that area, understand what Islamic extremism does to places. And I think with everything, there's a nuance to all this, right? Do I 100% agree with, like, exactly how this was done? No. I think that there were definitely better ways to do this. I think that the message that they started putting out initially was also what kind of caused the issues. It was just be like, hey, because Iran's doing this, we're doing this, right? There's already a bad narrative when it comes to Israel and us, that you're just kind of, I kind of deem it as, they coined the term, we have Trump derangement syndrome, the sort of Israel derangement syndrome, right? It kind of leads into that. Do we have, and I always want to point this out, we definitely have a lot of distrust when it comes to the Israel and especially their intelligence services, right? We do this back and forth. Like, they spy on us, like, we tell them to stop, they keep doing it. The Mossad, they are who they are. And Israel, to their own, they are fighting an existential crisis where they believe they're in a fight for survival, which is why they do what they do. They have different values than we do. They have a different appetite for civilian collateral than we do. And I think that causes a number of different issues, because, one of the things that I'm always proud of as the American military is that we go out of our way to avoid civilian casualties to our own detriment, right? But that's, I think, one of the things that was good about us, is that we are the greatest power in the world. But luckily, we have one of the best moral cores and standards of any nation. If we had Israel's level of values, I kind of fear for what would happen.
For sure. I mean, same with, Russia and China and Iran. I mean, even going back to World War II, the German troops that were captured on the Russian front versus the Western European front was vastly different. I mean, Russia killed over 1 million German captured prisoners, whereas we didn't. Obviously, that does still happen, but I agree. It's always our kind of highest level of objective is to avoid that at all costs. Sometimes it's not avoidable. But one of the things that I find kind of frustrating or troubling is the Straits of Hormuz thing in two ways. Number one is that, there was a true social post or a tweet or whatever, I think yesterday, where Trump basically said, open the straits or else.
Yeah.
To me, the frustrating part is I don't know how you kind of reconcile saying we've completely destroyed them, but yet we're telling them to open the straits. It's like, well, if we've destroyed them, we wouldn't need to tell them, we would be able to do it.
Yeah.
So like to me, there's a bit of a messaging problem.
Yeah. Well, I think that you're absolutely right, and that's definitely one of my frustrations, because if we have, but we also have to understand when they say that we've destroyed their capability, right? We never destroy 100% of their capability. We destroy maybe 95%. And because what they do with what's left is they're hiding it in caves and then bringing out when they need to strike. And we're doing a whole bunch of I forget what the term is for it, but when like an air mission is on target, but then suddenly they see one of their missile platforms get rolled out, they get quickly tasked over to do an immediate mission on while they're on that mission. There's a term for it, but I forget what it is. But it is frustrating because at what point, if we've decimated this country, the Strait of Hormuz shouldn't be a problem. It should be hey, if you want to deal in this particular area again, you should come to the negotiating table. So that definitely is frustrating. And obviously I'm not in those discussions anymore. So I don't know what is the answer to that or what's going on. I wish I did, because like I said, that is frustrating. I think that one thing that we always have to remember with specifically dealing with Trump is how he does things, right? And what people I think seem to forget is he says something outlandish, and for some reason people are surprised. I'm like, this is how this man has done everything. The art of the deal is written in that he's going to go way above whatever the offering thing, or is, with Greenland, oh, I'm going to invade Greenland. Canada, I'm going to make them the 51st state. He says these things, the outlandish things. So what he wants truly is somewhere down below, and that's in order to create this negotiating thing. And, so whenever he says something crazy like this, I just always take it with a grain of salt as this is a part of his strategy. Whether it's a good strategy or not, that's always what's left to be seen. So
I think not to interrupt, but the problem I find with that, and I agree, it shouldn't surprise anybody at this point.
Yeah,
I don't like it, and I also think here's where I would make an enormous distinction between being that way in business versus being that way in foreign policy. While there are for sure some parallels in deal making and negotiations and whatever, I don't think this one applies to foreign policy and military actions where people are losing their lives, where you play with it like that. I think that's a mistake.
Yeah.
When you were kind of at the height of your intelligence career and really in the weeds with, kind of the Iran component of that, was the Straits of Hormuz an element of discussion often? Is that something where the control of that being that bottleneck and kind of the main thing that could be a hiccup, is that something that you guys talked about?
It was, because we understood that it's really the only thing that they can really control that would affect the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Because they try to do this through proxy with the Yemen and the Houthis, but they have such a limited capability. But that, especially that strait at the beginning, they just have, it's so narrow, and they just have all these land-based missile batteries in addition to our Navy. It's almost impossible for it not to be an issue. And so if they wanted to affect, that's the one thing that they can do.
So, that begs the question in my mind, from an op plan or strategy standpoint, I would say collectively within the Department of Defense. To me, it kind of reminds me of law enforcement, where it's this is a law, right? And so, okay, we'll realize that law needs to be important enough to where you're willing to take somebody's life over it. Because if, let's say it's selling loosies in New York City, one cigarette at a time, well, we're going to make that illegal now. Well, if you get somebody who resists arrest, and then now it turns into a struggle, and you end up killing somebody over it because they, were resisting, is that worth it? To me, it's kind of that same thing here. I'm curious, was the strategy of, if push comes to shove, was the scenario that we find ourselves in right now, was that ever brought up of if it comes to this, what are we going to do? Because if the straits are closed and we've decimated their ability to attack outside the borders except for the straits, you really have one of two options. You can say, okay, well, I guess that didn't work and now they still have it. Or you're saying, we're going all in, we're going to do whatever it takes, including up to and including boots on the ground, to overthrow this government and its entire capability militarily, so that we can now control the straits and let whoever through as we want. Is that something that you remember being discussed as to what we would?
So it was. So I remember these discussions happening as early as 2012 that I was a part of. And it was definitely a decision, because almost everybody who's in these rooms were all veterans of the Iraq War. And what we didn't want was the failures of the Iraq specifically, but the Iraq and the Afghanistan wars, where we failed, to happen in Iran, right? But we knew that there was actually a culture in place, that the population wanted this. And so we knew that if this was going to happen, the people of Iran had to do this, right? But how do we help them? Do we, sort of the game plan of how we combated the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, advisors, supplying weapons, everything like that. And that's definitely a good plan. And we knew that if we were going to do this legitimately, that's what we're going to do it. But the Iranians are not stupid. They know this. And that for decades, they have been putting in place countermeasures to that, because they know that that's our only plan, right? It's our only feasible plan without political suicide, right? However you want to call it, right? But that's what I refer to it as, because if we do another invasion, because one, Iran is not going to be as easy as Iraq was, right? There's mountains, desert warfare, that's just something we were good at. Iran will be a whole different issue. The IRGC doesn't play nice. The besieged won't play nice. So people are going to die. A lot of people. And then once a few Americans die, then what do? We now have to retaliate. We have to get revenge. It's this endless cycle. So we knew that they had to do it. And we could do it through advisors. We had to coordinate, create sources within the Artesh, because we knew the Artesh would be our biggest chance of standing up to the IRGC. So what do? They start putting as many loyalist officers in the Artesh. Right. And then so they've been trying to counter every move that they know that we're right, because they're not dumb. They're smart.
Well, I think the other thing too is that they're committed. I mean, to your point, the hardline aspect of it is significant, and it's big in numbers. And, the whole negotiation thing, again, growing up in Germany, and we've mentioned, kind of the rise and fall of the Nazi party but even in the fall, if you look at how far Hitler and the Nazi regime drug the entire country down with it, and they refused to capitulate. I mean, until basically the guys are at their door ready to kick it in and shoot them, and that's when they kill themselves. But they could have surrendered a year prior to that and saved millions of countrymen's lives and billions of infrastructure within the country that ended up getting bombed because of it. I see Iran doing the exact same thing. They're not going to surrender.
Yeah.
So what do we do then?
That's a great point, because, and I would actually say that they would do this to even a greater degree than even Germany did, because they, the Germans, obviously, we knew the SS was doing bad stuff, but the majority of the German army, right? I think a decent portion of the German army was fighting a conventional war, and there was fair treatment, as considerable as I guess as could be during World War II, right? Definitely Germans treated American and British prisoners better than the Japanese did, right? The IRGC has been committing atrocities for a while, and not only do they know that their livelihood is completely at stake here, Their lives are too, arguably, because what happens when the Iranian people take over? What do you think they're going to do to the IRGC people who they know who killed their family and friends? There's going to be a bit of a purge. So they probably believe that their lives depend on this. Not only just their livelihood, but their lives. So then how do you then deal with that, right? It's so embedded. And I think that is the real question. And that's why this is such a difficult situation. And you know, you can go back and forth about this, like, so like why, like the whole Joe Kent thing. You know, when he was on the Sean Ryan show, he talked about how they were a threat. And then in his resignation, he talks about how he doesn't believe that they're an imminent threat, right? And if you go through his interviews since then, especially on his most recent Sean Ryan, he numerous times talks about how Iran still is a threat, right? He's like, but they calmed down. Their proxies shut down once Trump took over because they were afraid of his retaliation. And he just felt like we didn't need to do this, and we're essentially aggravating somebody we didn't need to aggravate, right? I slightly disagree in this particular thing, just because I think that what Iran does in this situation, and this doesn't make it right or wrong either way, but I think they're just waiting until Trump's out of office, and then they're going to start back up, kind of just how Russia does, how they do Ukraine operations. They wait till a certain president is not in office or a certain one is in office, and then they conduct operations because they know those red lines are going to get crossed and there's going to be no retaliation. So, you know, what do you do in those situations? And it's just like, are we actually preventing, you know, are there actually nuclear weapons? You know, so what do we know about that? You know, there's always the debate about, well, they just want to enrich, and they just need enrichment to you know, create nuclear power. But in order to get nuclear weapons, they need enrichment as well. So like, at what point I'm not a nuclear physicist. I don't know the exact workings of how I just know that enrichment is required for both nuclear power and nuclear weapons. Yeah. So
with that, I guess the hypothetical of, you know, with knowing what you know, pretty extensive background on preparing for kind of what we're going through. In a hypothetical scenario, you're now sitting in Trump's shoes. What does the way forward look like to you?
I think it's time to walk away.
So just,
I think use the pressure of the ground forces that he's brought into the area as like a threat. Like, hey, come to the table. Let's make a deal. Let's open the strait back up. And, you know, we'll let you run your country again. I think if he does that, I think that in a way is a kind of a W. I think if we go troops on the ground, I think it's bad news. I think we don't need to touch Karg Island. I don't think nobody needs to get on that island unless we plan to invade the entire mainland country. But I think that we do need to get out of this with a good deal that he can be like, hey, you know, this was a benefit to ours. We set the Iran program back a bit, and you know, they came to our demands, right? And that could be a W, especially for the Republican Party before midterms.
I guess I certainly understand in the grand scheme, like a win isn't a win entirely, right? Yeah. There's some dings and some L's kind of mixed into it, maybe in a smaller degree. To me, in this case, though, if the jewel or the crux of the entire thing is Iran's loose cannon nature in complete control of the Straits of Hormuz, you haven't really changed much. I mean, yes, they did get rid of, you know, a lot of ayatollahs and a lot of kind of hierarchical structure that's been there for a long time, and there's going to have to be some figuring things out. I don't disagree in that maybe that's the best thing is right now there is a united enemy in us. And, you know, maybe we've destroyed enough to where if we're like, all right, well, you guys got it. Like maybe there's enough infighting to where they will figure out how to unfuck themselves and something good happens. But at the end of the day, you still have the Straits being controlled by a group of people who, you know, aren't on your side, are in bed with China and Russia. Mm-hmm. You know, that certainly is not politically expedient, but I don't disagree in that. I think if you're looking at it as a lesser of two evils, I think, I would agree with your assessment entirely. I wanted to come back to the China thing for a second, and I feel like this is a good point to tie that back in, which is, you mentioned they have their claws everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. Including China, or I'm sorry, including Iran. They had it in Venezuela. They've got it all over Africa. I mean, Indonesia, the Philippines, you name it. I mean, they're everywhere. Australia even. The one thing that I think I struggle with, and a lot of Americans struggle with, and there's a narrative that I believe is disingenuous, which is the reason why Iran hates us so much, and so many countries in the Middle East in particular hate us, is because we're free, right? Like that's the most common excuse, which is total bullshit.
I completely agree with you.
And the reason why, to me, from a practical standpoint, like you don't see any of these countries having any issue with China, none. Right, and they're I would say it's easy to argue that they are more invasive from a people in their country and economic influence, et cetera, in so many other places. Like, why doesn't Iran have a problem with China? There's one reason. It's because China's military isn't right there.
Yeah.
If China moved 30 subs and 5 carriers and put a base in Qatar and one in Tajikistan, and were posturing constantly, I think they'd run into the same issues. That's my take on it.
Yeah.
As somebody who's seen a lot of their influence, do you see that as being the singular reason why you don't see Chinese companies and government institutions and embassies and civilians being kidnapped? Like, they're not targeted, at least from what I see. I don't see that.
Yeah.
Do you see any evidence of that?
I think it's constant shifting alliances. So you think back to the 70s, Iran was outside of Israel. Iran was our best friend in the West. And, at that time, that current leader, it served a purpose to be friends with us and actually helped us to combat Soviet expansion at the time. So right now, China, one thing that they do really, really well is who they want to become their friends, they definitely help them. And as alliances shift, China's their friend, right? Until the point that they're not, right? Is that going to happen anytime soon? No, just because China doesn't work like that. As they say, China plans in dynasties, right? They're in there for the long game, which is really hard for us to combat because we've never had to combat an enemy who plans in dynasties.
Yeah.
Like Russia doesn't do that. Like Russia, if anything, is someone we can put our head around that. It's hard to put our head around what China does. So what they do is so not traditional that it's even hard to kind of put your thumb on exactly what they're doing. But I think it comes down to shifting alliances. Right now, it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that's what China does quite a bit. And, they even still have their own friendships with us. They play both sides of the board. And it's kind of impressive if you really think about it. Like their level of reach and influence throughout the world. It's that's how they do. They're going to win this. They want to win this war through political and economic games. If China can do it without a bullet ever being shot, that's exactly how they're going to do it.
I mean, they seem to be doing a good job at it. Do you think that there is a component of their lack of military presence in all of these places that they have economic influence and investment into is a big part of why they're not viewed as being threatening the way maybe we are? Yeah,
because I think it's how we view things traditionally. And I think it takes us usually too long to realize a threat is a threat until after it's a threat, And that's where I kind of one thing I hate is these argumentative logical fallacies that people use, especially when people get on the thing oh, well, it's a threat, but it's not an imminent threat, right? Well, when has something become an imminent threat, right? When is it a threat? Al-Qaeda was a threat, not an imminent threat in 2001. What point do they become, right? And even how we fight wars, we talk about this all the time. We train to fight the last war. right? And so our intelligence services, or even our government, is trained to fight the last enemy, which is typically in some sort of fashion either a Middle Eastern nation or Russia, right? Do we truly understand how to fight what China's doing? And I don't think that we do, because one of the advantages, if you think about this, why China doesn't have military in certain nations, this actually kind of serves two purposes. One, we don't aggravate the typical threat matrix. And then also, nations get kind of aggravated when you have military forces there. So if you're just there to basically, hey, I'm going to assist your government financially, that physical presence doesn't become a thorn in your side. So it takes longer to develop influence in those countries, but like I said, that China plays the long game.
Yeah, I mean, imagine, if China had an aircraft carrier 20 miles off the coast of San Diego, and then put, an enormous Air Force base in Tijuana. We'd lose our fucking mind.
Absolutely.
Right? We would, we would say, it's posturing, you're aggravating, you're picking a fight, you're, fill in the blank. And I think that's the one key thing. And then there's also, I think the Israel issue also, our level of support to them over the decades has also infuriated most of the countries in the Middle East to some degree.
Yeah.
But from your perspective, where does the other Gulf states, where do they rank, or what role do they play in what we're doing right now? Most specifically, actually, Saudi Arabia would be my biggest question, because financially and militarily, I think, maybe Jordan would be a close second or a second. But Saudi Arabia, I think, has the most capacity, from my understanding. You correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Between money and military might, and in opposition to Iran historically. Do you see them and any of the other Gulf states playing a role in any of this?
I do. So I think one good thing that has come out of this is those Gulf nations were already not the biggest fans of Iran, because they aggravate them and all the different things. Their indiscriminate strikes against them in retaliation was probably one of the best things that could happen for us in this particular issue.
And one of the dumbest things they could have done.
Absolutely. And this is where, some of their strategists in that country, it's not the brightest individuals. But so this conversation about the issue of Strait of Hormuz came up about them building a canal in the UAE 5 years ago.
Yeah, a skirt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of like, okay, they decided to go a different direction, I think. But that conversation is now back open again. And I think that I would not be surprised if the UAE actually, and I'm sure that a bunch of other Gulf states will contribute. Obviously, it's going to take a couple years for that to be open.
If they had done it then, we wouldn't be
exactly.
This,
So I think that if as long as they're smart and they realize hey, this is going to keep happening, which it will. It's you're stupid to think that this will not happen again.
Yeah.
They can be ready for the next issue or the next time this happens. And then the one thing that Iran can control, if you can take that away from them, you take a lot more from them. And then maybe that is the push that they need for the Iranian people to officially take over their government back over. So, and I think Saudi Arabia definitely plays a big role in this for a couple reasons. One, we have seen a growing in that with the Gulf states, sort of secularism, the anti kind of Islamic extremism. And you see this, multiple different princes have come out basically hey, you guys really don't understand the Islamic extremism, it should not be trusted. So I think that growing anti-religious sentiment is growing even in those states. So I think that also works to our advantages. It's just, at the end of the day, they're going to do what they think is best for them, and that changes.
Yeah.
And that's ever evolving. And it's really hard to keep your thumbs on, hey, keep your eye on the prize, but they have their own shifting alliances themselves and who they hate the most this week versus, who. So that's one of the reasons why the Middle East has always been so hard and why we struggle to operate because of these shifting alliances, Sunni versus Shia, Syria, Russia, all these different nations closing in, Iraq versus Iran, Kuwait, UAE, everything like that. It's just it's not the easiest target sets.
Yeah. From your understanding of the intelligence piece, and I know you're a few years removed from it, but do you think it's even feasible? Like if we were to make the decision, boots on the ground, like not to take over the entire country, because to me that would be foolish either way. What I could see happening is Carg Island and the several miles within the straits inland, enough to control the straits where now they don't have control over it. Obviously, that sets up an absolute nightmare for maintaining that ground, because no matter how far inland you go, wherever that line is going to be attacked constantly.
Yeah.
You also can launch ballistic missiles and drones at whoever is maintaining that constantly, which I'm sure would happen.
Yeah.
Is there any feasibility in your mind for us to be able to actually accomplish controlling the strait without taking over the entire country?
It's difficult because this is something that we looked at. So the concept, if you think about this, is we would take Carg Island and we would take all the ports. And we'd probably take a certain amount of distance in between these ports. The problem is you are now holding static targets. And if you have the intention of just using those as staging points and moving throughout the country and then taking the whole country, that's one thing. But if you're just going to take those specific areas, you've now just created static targets. And let's just say that there is a conventional push, right? And obviously this can be argumented, but you think of the concept of Dunkirk. You are limited in space and you are retreating into, amphibious operations so that they then have to extract the troops. Will our U.S. forces on the ground need to do that even against an RGC, Artesh conventional push? Possibly not, just because our forces are in training are more superior to theirs. So there is, possible thing, but that does create issues that it's hard to oversee. And then how many losses do we take just by holding those ports, how by holding those lines for what? Like if the goal is not only to take over so much, then what are we waiting for?
And I also think, I don't know that would truly capture and control the straits either, because they could still launch things from inside the country to boats and our ships. And, it would be a constant, air to air battle, or, surface to air and air to surface battle of that entire area once we tried to control it.
Yeah. And we created like a demarcation line, within the country. And now this is a battle line, but for how long do we hold that? Like, I think that's the biggest problem that we've had with Iraq and Afghanistan. Like, what were our end goals? Like, when was this going to end? Right? I think that we need to have an end date, but there's a balance with this, right? You don't want to tell our enemies what our end goal is, right? Like, you need to keep that a secret so that, they don't know what to wait out. But we do need to have a goal with every single thing, or else we're going to get locked into Vietnam, those type of conflicts. So I think that is a huge danger. We need to keep remembering these lessons from history, because if we don't, that's why we're doomed to repeat them. Because we have been taught, like that's why Desert Storm was so successful, is because the officers who were in Vietnam were the commanding generals in Desert Storm. And that's why the Yellow Ribbon campaign was started prior to Desert Storm, because like they remembered what it was like to come back from these conflicts and have no support. That was one of the reasons why Desert Storm kicked off. And there was a point they left and then they got out, right? I think that this is another example, especially when dealing with the Middle East. Occupying forces just doesn't work for us. We're not very good in this area. This isn't Japan. This isn't Germany. There's an argument to be said that because the Iranian people are different, and they probably are, of any culture in that area who would take occupation or that sort of like, let us help your government and then you can succeed, it's definitely the Iranian people. But is it like, how successful is that? And that's a whole nother question. So
yeah, because the other thing, the intangible that, because I agree, in a people, they're probably more likely, maybe Jordan, maybe not, I don't know, but I think that the problem that exists or would exist in that particular scenario that you don't see or didn't see in Germany and Japan post World War II is the flocking of Muslim extremism to that region just to fight Americans.
Yep.
there weren't Japanese or Nazi sympathizers flocking from all over the world to now come attack Americans in Germany and in Japan. And you would have that the same way you had in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's problematic for, I don't know that we have objectives, but let's say hypothetically that Trump comes out, this afternoon and says, our objective is to control the strait and allow, some sort of new regime take power, whoever that is, whoever you guys put, like those are our two objectives. Once they're met, we're out of here. Do you think that A, do they even have those objectives, and B, that it would be foolish to communicate something that broad spectrum?
It's a good question. I think that because at some level you have to communicate your intention even with your enemy. If you're going to get them to come to the table and surrender, you have to be like, okay, this is sort of what we're looking for, right? The length that you'll go is probably the thing that you need to keep close hold, right? That's why having the 2,500 Marines and I guess the 82nd that's now over there or in that area, having that is like, hey, I am prepared to do this, right? Obviously, we don't want them to do that. But having that, and then also how much of a bluff is that, So I think that what comes out of this as a win is that the Strait of Hormuz opens up because that sort of temporary economic pressure that we see especially at the gas pumps needs to go away. Because if it doesn't, that's just only going to spell political issues for not just the party, but the United States, I think, in general. But we also need to come away with some sort of in the negotiation of this, like a perceived W that who we allowed this particular whoever's left to take over with stipulations, kind of what would happen in Venezuela, right? That the deal was like, hey, we're not going to take all of you. We're just going to take Maduro if you play nice. And that's what needs to come out of that. That's a slightly more complicated issue because this is not just one person. This is an entire organization. Yeah. And every time you cut off a snake, which we've seen time and time again, sometimes with whoever rises back up is worse than who was there prior.
Yeah.
So at some point, you're hoping that somebody who's slightly moderate comes up, or they're just like, hey, we'll deal with you for now. And how long lasting of that deal is that going to go? So it's definitely a complicated issue. And yeah, I think just to get out with a W, you have to make a deal to open the strait, and then Iran has to concede to a certain level of concessions within this particular issue.
I just don't see them conceding, and I also, like, if I put myself in their shoes, which granted it's hard to do because there's so many elements from a mental aspect that I just don't share with them, and I can't see it from that point. Having said that, 2,500 Marines in the 82nd Airborne is not going to take over the country of Iran. Like, it's not going to do anything close to that. You would need 3 times the amount of invasion forces for Iraq and Afghanistan to be able to take that entire country. You would need the entire United States military in full force with everything we have.
Armored divisions.
Yeah, to even consider being able to do it. And then you're talking tens or hundreds of thousands of U.S. casualties in doing so.
Yeah.
So I don't really get the bargaining chip leverage point, of saying, hey, we've got some troops over here. If I'm Iran, I'm like, and
yeah,
we have 1 million of them sitting here. Plus, what's a few thousand going to do? And
I actually 100% agree with you. This is where, and I want to put this out. Like, I'm not like an ever Trumper. Like, I think that he does certain things well. I definitely think that the way that he talks, does get things done sometimes, but it's extremely divisive. And I think at the end of the day, it's like the way he talks and goes about his communication, I think it causes more issues than it solves. Having said that, one of the reasons, I think slightly works in our advantage is because we are sitting here as Americans wondering whether or not he's going to do something. When you are sitting on from the other side, you are definitely thinking the same thing. So the chance of whether or not this is a bluff the fact that he has been so decisive and he has been so like erratic in the way that he may do things does work to our advantage in a negotiation standpoint of view, because it's less seen as a bluff than it possibly is. So that is one possible advantage in the situation. But at the end of the day, this is not a great situation. And this could get progressively worse the longer that we stay in here.
Yeah, I mean, because agreed. Like, I think there are some advantages to that style, even if I don't like it. But ultimately, to your point earlier, like, this is their lives and livelihoods, and it's ingrained in their entire society. Like, there's not really a motivation for them to secede anything.
Absolutely.
Because what's the upside for them? Like, you're going to stop bombing us? Well, we're still here. Like, we just shot down one of your jets. Like, clearly we're still a threat and a problem. And you're telling us to open the straits, so you don't control it, which means we do. Yeah. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have, or that you want to bring up about Iran kind of in its...
Well, I do actually want to go back quick point you mentioned, because I actually think it's a really good point about how they look at things, right? Because they are, and it's hard for us to put ourselves in their shoes. Because even for me, who spent majority of their life surrounded by Persian culture, like professionally, they've been a big portion of majority of my career. And even then, it's even hard for me to put myself in the shoes of an IRGC commander, right? What would I do with face of the situation, especially if this is like, it's life or death, right? At what point do you give up, or do you just like, hey, we'll fight this to the death? And it definitely could be the latter. So I don't quite know. So as far as anything else, as far as Iran goes, I would say that one thing, probably the best thing that we've done in the last like 3 decades, was killing Qasem Soleimani. People do not understand how much of a linchpin that man was. He had a huge portion of the entire Middle East marching to him in lockstep, because he was this charismatic, almost like General Patton, like stand at the front, no body armor, went to, and you have people who have fought each other in wars, ready to die for each other. And when he died, his successor, Asmir Camille, I'm screwing his name, I know I am, was nowhere near the level of charisma. And we've already seen issues with that, especially with like the Shia militias in Iraq, because anytime the Qasem Soleimani would be like, hey, we need you to do this, without question, they would do it, whether it's the Iraqi government or the Shia militias themselves. And what we started to see since Soleimani has been killed, that they're not refusing orders, but they're maybe disregarding orders. They're like, at the end of the day, they're Iraqis and they got their own issues to deal with. And so that is definitely helping. So that one thing was probably the most effective thing I think that we've done in the last 20 years. And also, the proxies really weren't doing much until he took over in 1997, when he took over the Codes Force, and he built it into what it is today. So I think just remarking on the fact that right there, it was so effective. And that goes back to the lesson, like, when we deal with these countries, that is what we need to do. I think it's just what is best serves not only our tactical purposes, but like our political purposes as well, because we don't want to get caught in these Middle Eastern conflicts, because they are ever ending. They are ever ending, shifting alliances. And, it's just one sect to backstab another. Like, you look at the opposition groups, like they talk like at the beginning of this, like, are the opposition groups going to help, right? The biggest opposition group in Iran is the MEK. The MEK helped the Islamic Revolution overthrow the Shah, then turned around and helped Saddam in the Iran-Iraq War, and then fought the Islamic Revolution. And like, yeah, they're the biggest, most well-trained, most well-organized, but nobody in that country trust that group, and there's a lot of them. And then you've got your Shias on the Palestinian or on the Pakistani border, and there are opposition groups over there, and the ones over Afghanistan. It's just like everybody's just looking for their peace.
Yeah.
And when does it stop? So doing these targeted strikes, taking out the person, as best as we can until the next one becomes an issue, has been the most effective way we deal with things. Unfortunately,
and we touched on it earlier a little bit, but the last question I'll ask on it, and then we'll move on, is obviously we've taken out, between us and Israel, we've taken out quite a few high-level leadership, both ayatollahs and military leadership within the Iranian regime to a significant degree. Hypothetically, if we were to enact that scenario where we say, okay, we're pulling out, basically, we've degraded your capability to attack outside your borders overwhelmingly. Like, yes, do you still have a here or there kind of thing, but your ability to enact terror internationally is degraded significantly. Have we taken out enough of the leadership to where, in a vacuum where now we're not the united enemy of all of the military forces there, that you could actually foresee all of the different groups and a power struggle which actually works in our favor, to where they would be fighting each other now so much to where they'd be too discombobulated to unite against somebody who's not actively attacking them?
That's a really good question. So I want to preface this with another slight thing that's going on. So the IRGC has been gaining power since the second Ayatollah came into power in 1989, because the first Ayatollah was Ayatollah Khomeini, and the second one was Ayatollah Khamenei, who took over power in 1989, who was the president during Khomeini's tenure. He was a big fan of the IRGC, and the IRGC has been gaining power ever since. And it went from 15,000 to the 160,000, and then incorporating the besieged and a number, and then they incorporated economic structures. One side effect to what we've been doing is we've been killing a lot of the clerical leaders, the clerics and the religious leaders. That, it was a military nation, but that's run by priests or clerics, your theocracy. The IRGC is taking power, gaining more power in relation to what originally the theocracy held against the IRGC. So that is slightly one downside. And could be argued that the theocracy was actually holding the IRGC in check. So that is something just to keep in mind as a potential issue. But at the end of the day, these people are still humans. They have their own worries, desires. Have we struck enough fear into them that, like, hey, you want to keep aggravating us, we'll keep killing you? As basic and as like cold natured as that sound, that's probably our best hope of them basically not becoming an issue, at least for a while, is them like, hey, I just don't want to get killed anymore. Let's deal with what we have. We can take power. We can keep power, right? Because there always is that ever, like, do we lose enough that the people do eventually rise up, and then we lose everything, right? I think that is the best motivation that we could possibly have. It's not the greatest motivation, because you're betting on the worst of human natures.
Yeah. Man, amazing insight on the region, and again, to have your experience and knowledge base is really a treat for me to be able to have this discussion with you. Broader intelligence wise, have you paid much attention to the Charlie Kirk stuff, the Thomas Crooks stuff, the kind of things that are a little bugaboo-ish within the United States in the last few years? Is that something you pay much attention to?
To a certain extent. This is where we get into, this is like an interesting subject, because I feel like you have to touch on, for lack of a better word, conspiracy theories, right? And everything's a conspiracy theory until it's proven right, right? And I think as human nature, I think just even as a the best person that you can be. One, we know how governments work. Should not be trusting your government 100%, right? It is always healthy to be skeptical because, that has helped us in so many different ways. History has taught us this. That this has helped us to escape tyranny. So, but it can be used broadly. But at what point does something stop being a conspiracy theory and then be actually being something true, right? It has to be proven. And that takes time, especially when when intelligence comes out and be like, okay, let me think about this. Was 9/11 an inside job? Was Charlie Kirk's assassination, was JFK? Yeah, was the CIA killed JFK and all these different things like that. As time has went on, there's some validity to some of these things, right? But the most important thing, which unfortunately we have to wait for the intelligence to come out. And are there organizations who might be involved who are purposely trying to keep this intelligence? Absolutely. They're not doing their job if they're not. So then if we put ourselves in this situation, like, how do we deal with that? How do we sift through what's true and what's not? And this also kind of even goes back to like a level of stoicism. Like, what do you put your mental energy towards? Am I going to put it towards conspiracy theories? I could, right? But that's something I can't control. And to me, in a lot of ways, until it comes out, it's proven, I feel like it's almost a waste of my own mental energy. So I personally don't put that much stock into it. But this also goes back to like my concept of like, I wait till intelligence comes out. I wait for if someone's them innocent to, they're innocent until proven guilty. It does create a sort of frustrating situation because you'll see the things like with the Epstein files, right? That frustrates me. Like, oh, this, why not release the whole thing? I don't understand exactly what's going on there. So, but do I put as much mental energy into it? Like, no, I hear what's being said. Yes. Do I put it into the back of my mind? Maybe like as I start to put things together analytically, do I start to think, okay, maybe this makes more like, for example, like let's take the JFK situation, what we know about how the CIA operated during those times, I think that we've started to see more validity to, more of those claims and everything like that, and conversations about presidents talking to the directors at that time. So unfortunately, we have to wait until it's really hard to make a decision. And, this goes into, and I get on my soapbox about this, about spreading disinformation.
I don't disagree. I think that the tough part is two things. Is one, we've learned the hard way over and over that our government institutions are not transparent, and they're not going to just release it because they feel like it. And number two is that if you do kind of sit on your hands and wait for them to, and by the time they do it, JFK as an example, it's like by the time some of this stuff is released and now it's being dug back up, it's like, what difference does it even make at this point? It's like now you can't change things that if you had known this 40 years ago could have and probably would have completely altered the course of American history.
Absolutely.
If we had done and been more proactive about it, and shy of going full Candace Owens or just being the squeaky wheel that's constantly trying to find out what's going on. I don't have a ton of confidence that any institution within the United States government is just going to tell us what's going on, because they don't. And they cover shit up. I mean, whether it's stuff you hear about January 6th or the Epstein stuff, or again, the Thomas Crooks assassination attempt, like still don't know jack shit about him. I don't know if you saw like some of the cell phones that he was in possession with, the amount of times they went to the DC area and the Northern Virginia area to places that are very, very strange, that a kid that age would be, and it's like, was there Iranian involvement? Was there government involvement? I mean, it's like, if there's not somebody asking questions and trying to hold people's feet to the fire, like they're not going to just offer that shit up.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how you kind of reconcile that.
So I think you have to acknowledge two sides of this, because with the advancement of the internet, our ability to access information is unparalleled. And this has allowed us to prove that a lot of these conspiracy theories, which we did not have the ability to prove prior, were actually true. This creates two things. One, it now creates, hey, it's no longer crazy to call something a conspiracy theory because we've proven that some of these conspiracy theories have been correct, right? So that's a good thing. The bad thing is now because there is some validity to, discussions about conspiracy theories, about things about governments not lying to us, everything like that, things that are not necessarily conspiracy theories and that not necessarily are now being, so now there's more stuff that's now you have to sift through, right? So that's the hard part about it. It's like a bit of a quagmire, but I think the good thing is with so many people, there's so many independent investigative journalists, and the independent media is one of the best things that's happened to us as a public, that you have so many people ready to either prove or debunk as soon as they can. And you look at like, who's that kid who went to Minnesota
Nick Shirley?
Yeah. People like Nick Shirley, that's like the best example of this, like people like that, right? But for the rest of us, right, as we're reporting it, I think it takes we have a sort of level of responsibility and due diligence to, like, if you are going to report it, it needs to be stated in a matter of fact, like, hey, we do not know this for sure, right? And analyze it how you would interpret any sort of intelligence with a level of critical thinking and analysis. Be like, hey, this could be true for this reasons. It could not be true for this many reasons, right? Be honest about that. Look at both sides. Any sort of issue, if you're not looking at both sides, you're just creating confirmation of bias, and you're just creating your own echo chamber, which never gets anything done. And then you're that tinfoil hat guy who believes everything. And then what validity you had for that one particular topic, people are no longer listening to because you went off the deep end about 6 other subjects.
Yeah, your credibility is fragile in
exactly.
those instances for sure. Yeah. Such amazing insight. I appreciate just all of your thought processes and perspectives on everything. Tell me about the Stoic Viking and your YouTube channel and kind of the goal with what you're doing now.
Yeah. So as I talked about earlier, the concept was from, the Stoicism, the ancient sort of warrior philosophies that helped me to get through the struggles of my life. And also I see them as like so many different metaphors to how you can just be the best man that you can be in this world, or the best person, if you will. And I realized that my purpose in my experience is to be in the service of other people. And this, one of the reasons why I never really go into operational details, because I don't want it to be about what I did, because one, operations are extremely unique. They're never going to be recreated, and any experience that is never going to help some new person, coming at but the general rules that we learn through our life, our trials and tribulations, those are the things that I try to make everything about. And then also making everything in a positive. If I talk about a problem, I need to present a solution. So when I made a video about my investigation, I used it as a way to talk about toxic leadership. But the final third of that video was about what positive leadership looks like. And then also talking about issues that nobody wants to talk about: mental health, suicide, the things that we need to talk about, and looking at it from a darker side of things, religion, God, purpose in life. And then also combining with physical health, because what's mental health if you don't have physical health? So I think it's overall the body, the mind, and then just how to make sense out of this crazy world.
I love every aspect of it, and I find myself drawn to that same kind of level of thinking and approach to a lot of things. Stoic Viking is the YouTube channel, right?
Yes, it is. And the Instagram is Stoic Viking 2025. And I actually just I get to announce that I am going to be featured in a magazine in DC. It's called the Platform Magazine.
Oh, nice.
And this is a magazine that actually it's kind of what they do. They want to talk about issues. They do definitely highlight a lot of veteran stuff. And I'm going to be on the feature cover and the featured story for the April issue that will be released April 15th. And it's
awesome.
featuring me and specifically the message and the way that I go about things. And one thing and honestly, and this has happened recently, one of the things that I've absolutely loved is that I've been trying to spread this message. I'm trying to do it the right way, not take any shortcuts, not do any clickbait. So obviously because of that, my channel only grows so quickly. But in recent podcasts, especially probably the Into the Breach podcast, and especially Brent's, there's so many comments of people coming in and being like, and they recognize, they're like, hey, this is the guy that doesn't get into the vet bro drama, and he talks about like analysis. That is one of the most rewarding comments that like I've been getting quite a lot lately, and it just lets me know that I feel like I'm on the right track to like help this overall, not just the vet community, because I feel like we could get back to how positive we were after we've had a couple issues with the recent people not telling the truth about things, but just overall the positive community, masculine, the men, the community of men within our own country, and creating a positive, outlook, like you and like Andy and, I feel like have like a positive, like when we have people who are looking at like, I want to join the military, we need positive role models, not this bickering and tinfoil hat crap.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming and spending time, and it's been a real pleasure to get to know you and interview you, and I just can't thank you enough for taking the time to do it.
No, I appreciate it. And honestly, I mentioned this to you before, is just one of the things I've always appreciated about you is that your interview style and how you've always been a person of like critical analysis and critical thinking, and the conversation that you and I go back and forth. I think of probably any interview that I've had, it's definitely made me really go back into the deep recesses of my mind and, how I actually truly feel about things. And
awesome.
Definitely making me work overtime after this.
Well, good. That's it's never the goal necessarily, but a positive outcome nonetheless. So I appreciate it very much.
Yeah.
To the viewer/listener, I hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't, you can choke yourself. And until next time, this is Mic Drop.